Reaching a precise count of 1000, their complex potion brewing process finally nears its crucial final stages. Highly satisfied with his meticulous work, Rust cheerfully declares that his daily quota is finally completely done. Finishing his rigorous task well before noon, he uses high-quality distilled water to transmute powerful magical creatures. Mixing magic energy uniformly ensures his exceptionally high-quality water is perfect for his afternoon of intense research. Suddenly interrupted in the laboratory, Rust politely asks Master Rihalzam if he needs anything specific right there. Rihalzam instantly mocks the basic research department people with a very menacing and incredibly arrogant dark laugh. Dismissing Rust's polite inquiry entirely, Rihalzam bluntly informs the young alchemist that the busy president is calling him. Rust reflects silently that Rihalzam constantly tries starting hostile arguments at every single available opportunity he gets. The arrogant man endlessly complains about budgets while fiercely boasting about his highly profitable arms department. Smirking maliciously, Rihalzam suddenly snatches the distilled water and fiercely demands that lowly chore workers stay quiet. Sitting at his grand desk, the president coldly announces a ruthless budget cut for the basic research department. Hearing this completely devastating news, Rust instantly widens his eyes in absolute shock and a state of silent disbelief. Staring blankly at the official document, Rust quietly stammers out the word zero in utter and complete disbelief. The arrogant president cruelly claims basic research shows no results and simply assists the genuinely profitable departments. Brutally delivering the final devastating blow, the president completely disbands the department and instantly assigns Rust to spade work. Ordering Rust firmly back to work, the cruel leader insists he should be extremely thankful for any job. The pompous president puffs his magical pipe with a booming laugh while Rust cedes in absolute furious silence. Rust realizes arguing is pointless since that very pipe directly required basic research to actually be manufactured. Complex heat conversion diagrams easily prove that basic research provided all the necessary solutions for that magical item. Rust angrily concludes that higher-ups are completely disconnected from the actual grueling work and true magical results. Slumping back in weary defeat, Rust realizes budgets and personnel have continually shrunk under this highly biased president. Despite the blatant disrespect, Rust proudly knows recent successful products absolutely relied on his now disbanded department. Preparing the highest quality ingredients himself directly guarantees the essential foundation for all their successful magical alchemical items. Acknowledging his beloved department is officially disbanded, Rust decides that reasoning with the current arrogant president is absolutely pointless. Suddenly, a specialized telecommunications device beautifully lights up with an unexpected message that catches Rust completely off guard. This technical marvel of modern alchemy prints text using basic materials provided directly by his former diligent department. Reading the newly printed document, Rust smiles softly as a warm wave of deeply nostalgic memories washes over him. The highly surprising letter comes from Kalen, a dear friend he has not seen since their academy graduation. Praising Rust as truly incredible, Kalen warmly recalls their close friendship before introducing an exciting new business proposal. A vivid flashback hilariously reveals them writing written apologies after chaotic magic turned their normal classroom into a jungle. Remembering they were always up to no good, Rust fondly recalls she performed wonderfully in the last war. Closing his eyes with a fond nostalgic smile, he eagerly begins reading the contents formally addressed to Master Rust. Getting straight to the point, she deeply hopes contacting him so suddenly does not seem overly rude today. Having recently received a vast borderland dominion, she eagerly asks if he will willingly help her develop the territory. Visualizing a stark metaphorical crossroad in his mind, Rust quickly realizes he now has two distinct paths ahead. He must firmly choose between a miserable life of chores or an exciting parchment filled with an unwritten future. Staring highly determined out the sunlit window, Rust confidently declares that he will officially quit his current job. Kalen warmly signs off her beautiful letter by eagerly encouraging him to come and have fun together again. Glancing around the quiet laboratory, Rust feels deep emotional attachment to the place he worked in for years. He fondly remembers the previous honorable president who actually understood basic research while developing many great products together. Addressing the crowd, the speaker declares that the basic research department people are the association's cornerstone. Following a sudden government change, Master Halhammer was unfairly demoted and completely replaced by an official. Clutching the document tightly, Rust quietly realizes that this formal letter is directly from the Arms Association. The greedy president wisely transfers the entire basic research budget to the highly grateful Arms Association. Listening intently outside, an intensely furious Rust wishes they would at least try muffling this conversation. Suddenly throwing the doors open, Rust startles the angry president who demands why he entered uninvited. Screaming at the top of his lungs, the furious president violently orders Rust not to enter casually. Standing absolutely firm against the immense disrespect, Rust boldly and definitively declares his intention to quit. Completely shocked by this bold rebellion, the sputtering president instantly screams that Rust simply cannot quit. Slamming his official document down, Rust confidently explains that his specific labor contract allows his resignation. Since his contract bound him to the dissolved research department, he possesses absolutely no training obligations. Waving goodbye to the panicking men demanding distilled water, Rust smoothly states he can leave today. Mocking their utter incompetence, Rust notes chores fall outside his contract and tells the alchemists to work. Sweating nervously, the men try agreeing with Rihalzam that losing Rust removes a major daily nuisance. Completely losing his temper, the furious president aggressively commands the ungrateful young alchemist to get out. Turning his back on the extremely corrupt association forever, Rust casually rejects their fake kindness completely. Pausing in the beautiful grand hallway, the adventurous young alchemist gazes thoughtfully at a massive dragon painting. Staring intensely at the beautiful artwork, Rust quietly accepts he will likely never see it again. Leaving the massive magical building behind him, he softly whispers a final deeply emotional thank you. Stepping out into the bright beautiful sunlight, he suddenly realizes exactly what it feels like to quit. With his lease fully cancelled and belongings packed, Rust happily decides this sudden freedom feels wonderful. Holding a magical summoning scroll tightly, he confidently prepares to head towards Kalen's distant dominion immediately. Channeling his powerful magical energy seamlessly into the mysterious scroll, the highly skilled alchemist activates it. Brilliant hexagonal magic circles glow intensely as he commands his trusty riding beast Hippopo to manifest. Bursting forth from the dazzling magical light, the massive riding beast Hippopo finally makes its grand appearance. Smiling with immense excitement at his faithful magical companion, Rust quickly prepares to mount the creature. Leaping swiftly onto the massive creature's broad back, the adventurous duo powerfully charges toward the borderland. They journey swiftly toward the extremely distant northern dominion that Kalen is currently working on developing. Recalling Kalen's intensely enthusiastic acceptance, Rust humbly doubts a regular alchemist like him is truly important. The massive magical beast fiercely gallops across the beautiful grassy terrain while Rust holds on extremely tightly. Gazing up at the beautifully clear sky, Rust calmly reflects that he hasn't been outside lately. The beautiful lush wilderness reminds him of the active times he constantly gathered rare materials out here. Taking a deep breath, he happily enjoys the nice wind and the wonderful smell of flowers. Looking at the rustling leaves above, he peacefully realizes he had been carrying tremendous emotional stress. Feeling highly rejuvenated by the beautiful outdoors, a highly determined smile finally spreads across his face. Having plenty of free time, he approaches the calm lake hoping to pick some fresh ingredients. Suddenly spotting ominous magical warning signs, Rust realizes instantly that something dangerous is definitely not right. Proceeding incredibly carefully, they shockingly discover an injured person completely collapsed in the middle of the road. Vaulting off his beast rapidly, Rust intensely commands Hippopo to stay alert for any hidden danger. Approaching with extreme caution, he heavily suspects the mysterious fallen figure might actually be a deceptive bandit. Examining the severely injured body closely, Rust is incredibly surprised to find a very rare knight priest. Recognizing the fierce vengeance goddess uniform, he immediately realizes the unconscious woman has a terrible fever. Seeing the knight completely unconscious, he quickly remembers some nearby medicinal herbs can alleviate intense fevers. The suffering knight groans in deep pain while Rust wonders if she knew about the herbs. Apologizing politely to the unconscious woman, he urgently moves to secure her compromised respiratory tract immediately. Checking her deeply troubled condition closely, Rust suddenly notices a highly alarming and deeply terrifying magical pattern. Staring in absolute shock at the dark marks, the skilled alchemist furiously realizes it is a curse. Rust intensely activates his magical scroll while initiating a complex magical transcription process. Kneeling beside the unconscious woman, he immediately displays a glowing magical interface above her. A detailed holographic scroll instantly materializes to thoroughly scan her deeply alarming physical condition. Realizing someone cruelly cursed her, he notes she suffers despite it lacking immediate danger. Carefully analyzing the magical data, he suddenly discovers a dangerous poison caused the fever. Lacking the correct potion, he deduces a familiar injected special poison into her flank. Refusing to abandon her completely, he highly resolves to rapidly brew a new cure. Springing into action, he desperately asks Apopo to watch over the suffering unconscious knight. Sprinting through the dense forest rapidly leaves the exhausted alchemist panting for precious breath. Wiping sweat from his forehead, he frustratingly curses his severe lack of physical exercise. Anticipating fatigue, he swiftly drinks a custom stamina potion to instantly restore his energy. Spotting surviving medicinal herbs near the lake brings a deeply relieved smile to him. Remembering the patch being wider, he assumes someone picked them and carefully gathers supplies. Identifying the specific plants, he quickly gathers herbs that miraculously expel poison and regenerate wounds. He notes that normal transmutation barely improves these weak herbs during standard potion crafting. Knowing the knight could never save herself with basic herbs, he plans a miracle. Judging her dire condition carefully, he decides a simple transmutation utilizing lake water suffices. Preparing multiple precise tools simultaneously, he expertly initiates a transmutation focusing heavily on speed. Gripping his specialized tools tightly, he loudly activates the powerful magical scroll hovering nearby. Casting multiple spells rapidly, he completely releases the constraints of gravity around his ingredients. Levitating the collected materials beautifully, he skillfully targets 5 specific floating items for synthesis. Snapping his fingers sharply, he boldly commands the magical circle to purify the floating materials. A stunning orb of liquid violently swirls as this intense purification process begins immediately. Feeling incredibly proud of his basic research, he uses his custom distilled water technique. The resulting floating sphere becomes an ultra-pure water that completely transcends normal purity. Examining the floating sphere closely, he proudly confirms it contains absolutely nothing but pure water. Having made thousands daily, he needs extra complex tricks beyond simply activating a scroll. Staring intently at the floating liquid, he makes microscopic adjustments, bringing out maximum purity. Adding the medicinal herbs directly into the perfectly pure water instantly melts them down. Seeking natural balance, the perfectly pure water completely destroys and eats the medicinal herbs. Holding the glowing mixture gracefully, he successfully creates a newly synthesized, highly concentrated potion. Fixating the completed golden potion successfully into reality, he prepares the 3rd magical scroll. Partially releasing the intense gravitational constraints, he smoothly extracts the glowing liquid securely downward. Guiding the magical stream directly into a glass vial produces a 0 impurity potion. Highly satisfied with his flawless work, he firmly grasps the newly made vial to hurry back. Suddenly the ground trembles violently as his loyal riding beast forcefully stomps the earth. Racing back toward the clearing, he urgently wonders if something dangerous is lurking there. A massive dust cloud aggressively erupts from the forest path, creating a terrifying scene. Hearing his beast trampling something repeatedly, he fearfully questions what terrifying creature appeared there. Arriving breathlessly at the chaotic scene, he anxiously asks the huge beast what happened. Praising his loyal beast for the massive attack, Rust wonders if the crushed creature is a familiar. He deduces that the defeated monster was highly likely chasing the severely injured knight on purpose. With the immediate monstrous threat finally neutralized, Rust politely excuses himself to treat the unconscious woman. He gently pours a magical liquid to immediately treat the gaping wound on her exposed flank. The incredibly potent magical liquid instantly seals the terrifying dark gash with a brilliant glowing light. Sensing the soothing healing magic, the beautiful knight finally opens her eyes with a soft groan. Springing up instantly, the fully healed knight aggressively draws her massive sword in a defensive stance. Glaring fiercely at the startled alchemist, she loudly demands to know where the dangerous enemy went. Maintaining his calm composure, Rust simply points toward the completely crushed remains of the monstrous familiar. Still gripping her weapon tightly, the suspicious warrior intensely demands to know his true identity now. Stopping himself from mentioning his former corrupt association, Rust hastily claims to be a traveling alchemist. Realizing old habits die incredibly hard, the young man internally nervously reflects on his recent resignation. Smiling cheerfully at his sudden realization, he happily embraces the incredibly fresh feeling of sudden unemployment. He kindly warns her against overexertion because dangerous poison still actively lingers deep within her body. Lowering her heavy blade slightly, the astonished knight sincerely thanks the young alchemist for saving her. Staring intensely at his glowing golden vial, she nervously asks exactly how much that cure costs. Catching her deeply suspicious gaze, Rust quickly realizes that she completely misunderstood his genuinely kind intentions. He suddenly realizes she falsely believes he cruelly demands high compensation before finishing their vital healing. Acknowledging that offering a free miracle cure sounds highly suspicious, he absolutely denies any ulterior motives. He gently explains he merely waited for her to regain consciousness to drink the potion herself. Blushing softly in deep embarrassment, the beautiful warrior sincerely apologizes for her initially highly suspicious behavior. Gazing into his honest eyes, she warmly acknowledges that his heroic actions stemmed from genuine kindness. Insisting she cannot simply accept such an incredibly expensive magical potion for free, she proposes something. Rust proposes a contract where she lends him her powerful sword during any future disastrous situations. Extending his hand politely, the traveling alchemist warmly asks the stunning knight for her real name. Smiling brightly at the stunned warrior, he kindly lends the glowing golden potion directly to her. Introducing herself as Toller, she fiercely vows her holy blade will cut through any future disasters. Staring forward with incredibly intense determination, Toller solemnly swears her eternal protective oath on her sword. Handing over the vial, Rust awkwardly realizes she took his simple contract far too seriously today. Drinking the sparkling liquid rapidly, Toller instantly feels an incredibly comforting warmth envelop her entire body. Dropping her massive sword in absolute shock, the astonished knight watches her dark curse completely vanish. Touching her flawlessly restored face gently, Toller stares in complete disbelief at the miraculous instant recovery. Overwhelmed with immense relief, she tearfully confirms that the deadly magical curse is finally completely gone. She passionately explains that numerous expensive holy waters completely failed to lift this incredibly dark curse. Rust silently reflects that his miraculously purifying liquid was simply perfectly pure water and nothing more. He realizes her severe misunderstanding stems from falsely believing the potion contained a highly divine element. Knowing his creation vastly outperforms holy water, Rust wisely decides to keep his alchemical secrets hidden. Keeping the basic nature of his cure completely secret, he anxiously remembers his urgent travel plans. Anticipating a massive incoming flood of complicated questions, the secretive alchemist decides to immediately escape today. Leaping swiftly onto his beast, Rust loudly declares he has urgent business to immediately take care of. Commanding Hippopo to run full speed ahead, he completely ignores Toller desperately calling out for him. Left completely alone in the silent clearing, Toller stares blankly at the incredibly mysterious golden vial. Holding the legendary elixir tightly, she solemnly acknowledges her massive life debt to this incredible stranger. Smiling with profound intense interest, the powerful knight eagerly vows to conquer any disaster he faces. Recalling his specific travel destination clearly, Toller remembers he is heading toward the incredibly distant borderland. Marching forward confidently, the fierce warrior resolves to finish her bloody vengeance quickly and head north. Bound incredibly tightly by their sudden magical destiny, the traveling alchemist and vengeful knight journey onward. True power quietly rests within the absolute basics, yet tragically very few people ever truly understand this. Pausing his long journey under the beautifully starry night sky, Rust decides to finally rest here. Enjoying a crackling campfire after saying goodbye to Toller, Rust continues heading toward the distant north. He warmly reflects on his newfound freedom after spending countless exhausting nights transmuting in the laboratory. Consulting his map while munching a snack, he playfully scolds Hippopo for trying to steal food. His unique traveling companions are customized portable potions crafted perfectly from mixed cereals and dried fruits. He remembers Kalen hilariously calling his special alchemical creations gross grass bricks that tasted like dirt. Pushing forward with renewed energy, the traveling alchemist strongly hopes to reach the village by tomorrow. Arriving the very next day at a quaint settlement, Rust calmly commands Hippopo to stop immediately. Observing Kalen's neighboring territory closely, Rust feels deeply concerned about the highly rundown and neglected buildings. Thanking his loyal beast for the long journey, he decides to personally investigate the suspicious village. Activating a specialized magical scroll, the skilled alchemist gracefully returns his massive riding beast to safety. Wishing his faithful companion a warm goodbye, he carefully secures the powerful magical scroll away safely. Suddenly encountering a stern-looking local villager, the cheerful alchemist prepares to introduce himself to the stranger. Startling the highly anxious villager with his sudden greeting, Rust politely introduces himself as a traveling alchemist. Hearing his prestigious profession, the shocked man immediately urges Rust to meet the local village chief. Walking through the quiet streets, Rust observes neglected buildings heavily suggesting that entire local families vanished. They soon arrive outside a heavily worn but noticeably important building acting as the village headquarters. Spotting fresh Kajero branches hanging near the entrance, Rust confirms they have reached the chief's house. An elderly man with a long white beard quickly emerges while doubting if Rust is legitimate. The skeptical village chief closely inspects the young traveler while deeply questioning his actual alchemical credentials. Smiling brightly at the old man, Rust proudly presents his official association medallion as undeniable proof. Leaning in to carefully examine the shining silver crest, the elderly chief instantly gasps in shock. The deeply humbled chief immediately formally introduces himself while acknowledging Rust possesses the highest possible rank. Modestly waving off the massive praise, Rust admits he never really gave his master medallion much thought. Embracing his incredibly prestigious title, Rust openly admits that the corrupt association truly leads the country. Sitting comfortably inside with fresh tea, the deeply apologetic chief nervously prepares to request a huge favor. Analyzing the polite old man perfectly, Rust confidently concludes the upcoming request directly concerns the ruined village. Accepting a warm cup from an elderly woman, the relaxed alchemist expects a very smooth diplomatic conversation. Savoring the delightfully warm tea, Rust listens as the chief unexpectedly asks for old-style magic crystals. Intrigued by this highly specific request, the traveling alchemist questions why they desperately need older crystalline models. The wise chief solemnly references the massive military revamp of magic guns deployed during the recent war. Rust angrily recalls the incredibly arrogant Rihalzam loudly bragging about his personal accomplishments regarding those newer weapons. Frustrated villagers angrily declare the highly touted weapon upgrade was actually just a completely useless catastrophic ripoff. Agreeing with the extremely frustrated younger man, the chief quietly instructs Zal to fetch the weapons immediately. Leaning forward with intense professional curiosity, Rust sincerely asks them to fully explain the failing magical weapons. Zal aggressively slams two distinct magical firearms onto the wooden table for the curious alchemist to inspect. The chief explains that magical firearms remain absolutely vital for defending remote villages against terrifying violent monsters. He praises the older reliable models as highly resilient tools requiring only rarely replaced magical crystal fuel. Inspecting the older model intimately, Rust instantly recognizes the incredibly reliable and highly precise H-32 mechanical design. Gently running his fingers across the cold metal barrel, the stunned alchemist realizes something truly terrible occurred. Examining the classic magic gun closely, Rust remembers Master Halhammer spearheading its development long ago. Rust greatly admires Halhammer's incredibly sturdy weapon design before recalling their completely awful newer model. An angry villager passionately complains that the supposedly sophisticated newer weapon model is absolute garbage. The frustrated villager aggressively curses the new model for its terrible efficiency and constant misfires. Their biggest devastating issue remains their complete production halt of highly necessary old magic crystals. Being completely unable to afford the terrible new weapons leaves the vulnerable village entirely defenseless. Desperately rationing their extremely limited crystal supply forces the terrified villagers to rarely fire back. This severe ammunition shortage unfortunately caused vicious monster attacks to rapidly increase across remote areas. The deeply terrified chief sadly explains how constant fear grips everyone protecting their vulnerable families. Fearing for their own lives forced countless panicked villagers to quickly abandon their beloved homes. Rust apologetically admits he completely lacks old magic crystals, causing the desperate villagers visible disappointment. The extremely depressed village leaders visibly slump down in total defeat after hearing this news. Smiling confidently at the heartbroken men, Rust cheerfully declares that he can easily manufacture them. The absolutely astounded villagers erupt into massive cheers upon hearing his incredibly miraculous generous offer. Calming the wildly excited crowd down, Rust smoothly pivots the conversation toward his expected reward. Pointing his finger upward, Rust casually requests a reasonable amount of simple Kajero materials instead. The thoroughly confused village leaders stare blankly at the surprisingly humble request from the alchemist. The highly puzzled villager clarifies that countless useless Kajero plants freely grow everywhere around here. Rust enthusiastically praises the forgotten plant, noting its severely declining popularity across most modern towns. Eagerly referencing ancient alchemical literature, Rust requests immediate directions to the fully ripened local grove. The respectful chief obligingly guides Rust outside, where an incredibly massive curious crowd immediately follows. Rust awkwardly notices the massive following crowd but understands their intense curiosity in this village. Arriving at the lush location, Rust excitedly admires the wonderfully overgrown and incredibly beautiful forest. Turning toward the gathered crowd, Rust politely asks the villagers to collect fallen plant materials. The strict chief immediately orders the highly eager villagers to start collecting the requested items. Inspecting the massive gathered pile of fresh branches and spiky fruits, Rust thankfully accepts them. Rust calmly explains that typical magic crystals are normally harvested directly from dangerous defeated monsters. Gripping 3 specialized alchemical tools tightly, Rust confidently reveals his brilliant alternative manufacturing method today. Kneeling gracefully on the ground, Rust dramatically activates 3 powerful magical scrolls simultaneously around himself. The completely astounded villagers watch in absolute awe as the incredibly rare ancient scrolls float. Wanting to impress the knowledgeable locals, Rust deliberately prepares a highly flashy and spectacular demonstration. Unleashing his immense power, Rust boldly commands the highly complex magical array to initiate purification. Rust proudly initiates his unique technique to draw pure magical elements directly from the atmosphere. Filtering the abundant ambient magic completely eliminates the highly dangerous need to hunt violent monsters. A violently swirling dark vortex of highly concentrated magical energy severely shocks the confused villagers. Smiling proudly with closed eyes, Rust controls the incredibly unique transmutation that only he masters. He masterfully manipulates the swirling atmospheric energy around the highly absorbent spiky Kajero fruits perfectly. Channeling his brilliant alchemical skills, Rust intensely activates his incredibly powerful magical polishing scroll next. A fierce atmospheric tornado spectacularly erupts upward, completely terrifying the wildly cheering and shocked crowd. Rust happily notices the terrified villagers marveling at the incredibly powerful and highly visible tornado. With extreme precision, Rust dramatically hurls the heavily saturated Kajero fruits directly into the vortex. He smartly explains that proper crystalline cutting determines the absolute final quality of magic crystals. The incredible polishing scroll utilizes dense swirling diamond dust to microscopically cut the bouncing fruits. Pushing his powerful magic further, Rust intensely increases the deadly diamond dust density extremely rapidly. Brilliant sparkling dust dramatically scatters everywhere, causing the heavily mesmerized crowd to gasp in awe. Hearing the excited cheering girls, Rust humorously notes that ladies universally adore extremely shiny things. Perfect multifaceted crystals spectacularly form within the storm, proving that precise cutting determines overall output. Carefully managing the intense abrasive vortex, Rust perfectly replicates the precise vintage magic crystal dimensions. Activating the final spell, Rust successfully seals the pure energy permanently inside the hardened fruits. Reaching his hand forward gracefully, Rust expertly catches the newly solidified and incredibly shiny crystal. A flawlessly polished magic crystal successfully materializes entirely from freely gathered atmospheric magical element particles. Smiling triumphantly at the deeply stunned crowd, Rust happily announces his highly complex transmutation complete. Rust prepares to begin the next phase of his miraculous alchemical work for the awestruck villagers. The ecstatic villagers celebrate wildly as they confirm the incredible stone really is a genuine magic crystal. Activating his powerful scrolls once more, Rust begins mass-producing the essential crystals to save the village. Demonstrating his immense skill, the master alchemist expertly activates 3 magical scrolls simultaneously to increase his speed. After a period of intense concentration, Rust finally finishes the grueling task while baskets overflow with glowing crystals. Wiping sweat from his brow, Rust reveals that he successfully transmuted the entire massive pile in 1 hour. He proudly presents the finished crystals, confirming they are all completely saturated with powerful pure magic elements. The village chief is utterly shocked to learn these custom crystals will last twice as long as normal ones. Overwhelmed by the sudden abundance, the villagers realize they possess more magic fuel than they can possibly use. The elderly chief remains speechless as he struggles to comprehend the sheer magnitude of this alchemical miracle today. Zal immediately begins organizing the transportation of the massive crystal haul back to the main village area. Rust reflects on the incredible success of his work while noticing the villagers' prepared supplies in advance. Declining further physical help, Rust prepares to discuss the future of the village with the grateful local leaders. Activating his specialized scrolls again, Rust prepares to demonstrate more advanced alchemical techniques for the gathering crowd. Using a controlled magical tornado, Rust effortlessly lifts the remaining pile of heavy Kajero materials into the air. The air fills with swirling plant matter as the powerful vortex manipulates the materials with absolute precision. To the absolute amazement of the spectators, Rust sucks every single material directly into his compact storage backpack. Approaching the village chief once more, Rust expresses his desire to discuss a very important private business matter. The respectful chief immediately agrees to lead the young alchemist back to his private residence for tea. Rust is highly impressed by the chief's perceptiveness and decides he can definitely trust the wise old man. Savoring a warm cup of tea, Rust finds immense personal fulfillment in seeing the village people so happy. Sitting across from the village leader, Rust prepares to formally address the future of the region's energy needs. Reassuring the nervous chief, Rust clarifies that he only wants to discuss their long-term cooperation and development plans. He explains that this single massive batch of crystals will easily power the entire village for several decades. Deeply moved by this incredible news, the village chief closes his eyes and expresses his profound eternal gratitude. Shifting the topic, Rust asks if other remote villages in the region also suffer from magic crystal shortages. The chief confirms that everyone in this desperate area would pay anything for these rare old-style crystals. Revealing his true intentions, Rust explains the specific business arrangement he wants to establish with the local leaders. He proposes a business partnership between this village and Kalen's new dominion to secure a steady revenue stream. The chief mentions Kalen's legendary military reputation and her incredible feats during the previous brutal war. He describes Kalen's inhuman strength while hinting at a specific fearsome nickname she earned on the battlefield. Rust frowns at the mention of the inelegant nickname, preferring to see Kalen simply as his dear friend. Acknowledging the high costs of developing a new dominion, Rust emphasizes the need for secret financial cooperation now. A detailed alchemical diagram illustrates the mutually beneficial flow of revenue and crystals between the two distant territories. Rust emphasizes the critical need to lay the proper groundwork before officially presenting this deal to the lords. He explains how a surplus of crystals will make the regional lord happy while providing the village security. The wise village chief offers his immediate and ready consent to the alchemist's brilliant and beneficial proposal. Requesting pen and paper, Rust prepares to write a letter to another old friend from the magical academy. He explains that his next move involves contacting a specific friend currently serving in the country's powerful army. Rust remains wary of Rihalzam's interference while becoming increasingly concerned about the army's potential reaction to this. Rust contemplates that exporting massive amounts of old crystals might eventually attract unwanted military attention. Writing his crucial letter, he smiles brightly knowing that his loyal beast is highly thoughtful. Sealing the official document with a specialized magical stamp completes his highly important long letter. An anxious crowd suddenly gathers outside the door while asking if the alchemist is leaving. Pushing past the gathered villagers, the young traveler simply explains he absolutely must leave today. Exited villagers aggressively barrage him with ridiculous requests for trivial magical chores and petty favors. Continuing his journey toward Kalen's distant territory, Rust waves goodbye while leaving the village behind. Traversing a dark wasteland environment, he nervously notes that violent monsters are appearing far more frequently. Hearing mysterious screaming creatures in the bleak surroundings definitely puts the young traveler completely on edge. Drawing his weapon quickly, the highly skilled alchemist fiercely defends himself against a sudden attack. Rust sincerely praises his loyal beast for constantly detecting aggressive hostility within these dangerous wastelands. Stopping near strange biological remains, he eagerly uses special harvesting gloves to collect a sample. Feeling slightly exhausted from endless fighting, the traveling alchemist crouches down to finally catch his breath. Embracing the intense thrill of endless constant danger, the passionate researcher genuinely loves exploring the wilderness. Checking his detailed map, Rust realizes that he is incredibly close to a large water source. A massive beautiful lake finally appears on the horizon, bringing immense relief to the exhausted traveler. Feeling totally relaxed by the calm and peaceful beautiful environment, he happily decides to rest. Wondering about new creatures, the curious researcher intensely hopes to find incredibly rare magical monsters here. Dark magical elements suddenly flutter strangely above the water, instantly drawing his full intense undivided attention. Startled by a sudden noise, he spins around completely alarmed while Hippopo frantically warns him. Rust observes a very strange creature with an incredibly rare and unusual color pattern nearby. Suddenly, a massive terrifying tentacle violently bursts forth from the shadows to attack the creature. The strange little creature squeals loudly as the terrifying tentacle aggressively targets the small lizard. Rust freezes completely as his eyes suddenly meet the terrified gaze of the small creature. He quickly reminds himself that appearing like a helpless child definitely does not mean harmless. Concluding it is definitely a dangerous monster, he coldly notes that nature dictates ruthless survival. Suspecting deceptive camouflage, he angrily orders Hippopo forward while hopelessly feeling sorry for the beast. The small creature squeals in absolute terror as the massive tentacle violently swings toward it. Rust quickly realizes the poor creature is completely trapped and completely unable to escape danger. Springing into immediate action, the traveling alchemist boldly dashes forward to rescue the strange creature. Activating a powerful scroll, he fiercely generates a sharp magical blade to sever the tentacle. The severed tentacle aggressively thrashes wildly on the ground while thick black blood violently sprays. Rust fiercely stands his ground while carefully holding the deeply frightened creature safely behind him. An incredibly massive horrifying monster finally reveals its terrifying true form from the dark shadows. Rust intensely analyzes the massive beast while rapidly preparing another highly destructive magical offensive scroll. Hippopo fiercely stomps the ground to heavily distract the horrifying monster from attacking the alchemist. Utilizing the perfect distraction, Rust immediately launches a brilliantly glowing magical attack toward the beast. The massive violent monster shrieks in incredible agonizing pain as the bright magical explosion hits. Fully defeated, the huge beast frantically retreats deep into the dark forest to survive today. Sighing in immense relief, the young alchemist carefully checks the rescued little creature for injuries. The little creature cheerfully rubs against him while softly squeaking its deep gratitude for surviving. Rust smiles warmly and gently pets the strange creature before it suddenly scampers away quickly. Watching it disappear into the thick foliage, he safely assumes the surrounding area is clear. Suddenly, highly stealthy armed figures brilliantly emerge from their highly effective camouflage right before him. Completely shocked by their sudden appearance, Rust instantly tightens his grip on his magical scroll. The mysterious armed guards aggressively point their sharp spears directly at the deeply startled alchemist. Hippopo immediately steps forward to fiercely protect his master while loudly snorting at the strangers. Keeping his calm composure, the brave traveler formally introduces himself as Rust the traveling alchemist. He confidently explains Kalen invited him while proudly declaring his highly prestigious master alchemist rank. Hearing his prestigious title, the armed guards immediately lower their weapons and finally stand down. Their stern commanding officer steps forward gracefully to formally address the highly respected traveling alchemist. The respectful commander politely welcomes Master Rust while openly expressing immense relief at his arrival. She sincerely apologizes for their deeply suspicious ambush while explaining that dangerous mimics roam here. She clarifies that approaching closer would have unfortunately triggered a highly lethal mimic monster attack. Rust finally realizes this hidden danger was exactly what his loyal beast frantically warned about. Impressed by their stealth, he curiously asks if their incredible camouflage cloaks involve advanced transmutation. The commander proudly clarifies that their flawless camouflage relies entirely on superb traditional hiding techniques. Rust nods respectfully at their intense training while eagerly preparing to finally enter the Dominion. The guards safely escort the highly anticipated Master Alchemist toward Kalen's newly developing northern borderland. Looking forward to the future, Rust cheerfully anticipates reuniting with his dear Academy friend soon. The masked commanding sister sincerely apologizes to the traveling alchemist for her younger sibling's aggressive behavior. Rust feels incredibly relieved to avoid a pointless fight immediately after arriving at his new posting. He silently wonders if the mysterious masked sisters possess some sort of highly specialized magical vision. He deduces the younger sister sees distant threats while the elder accurately judges an opponent's strength. Swearing on his official medallion, Rust successfully convinces the strict commander that the lizard is harmless. Expressing his deep gratitude for their leniency, the young alchemist politely agrees to follow the guards. Their masked commander gracefully gestures toward a large decorated tent serving as the local military headquarters. Entering the busy tent, Rust immediately notices diligent workers frantically operating highly complex magical communication devices. Peeking around a wooden pillar, the curious traveler observes how military information gets consolidated right here. Rust stares in absolute awe upon recognizing the incredibly rare and highly advanced modern communication equipment. Bursting through their wooden door, Kaylin cheerfully shouts her immense excitement upon finally seeing her friend. Rust widens his eyes slightly while feeling a warm wave of deep nostalgia wash over him. Bounding forward with incredible energy, the joyful young woman playfully collides directly into the startled alchemist. Laughing brightly at his unchanged demeanor, Kaylin teasingly remarks that her dear old friend looks older. Blushing slightly from the sudden playful insult, Rust awkwardly mutters that his age is private business. Regaining his formal composure, the young man respectfully addresses the powerful lord as Lady Kaylin today. Smiling warmly at her old classmate, Kaylin confidently states that reaching the borderlands was absolutely effortless. Glancing sideways at the masked guards, the cheerful lord asks if her welcoming party caused trouble. She playfully inquires if the two strict sisters who went out to welcome him were rude. Staring blankly at the stern guards, Rust nervously questions if that terrifying ambush was a welcome. He realizes the older sister deliberately provoked conflict to properly judge his character and actual strength. Kaylin happily explains her subordinate always purposefully causes initial trouble to build a much stronger relationship. Rubbing the back of his neck nervously, Rust honestly admits he never intended to cause trouble. Closing her eyes with a sweet smile, the relieved young lord states that is wonderful news. Clapping her hands loudly, Kaylin cheerfully commands everyone to take a break and follow her inside. Analyzing the strange environmental magic affecting monsters and plants leaves Rust pondering why humans remain perfectly unaffected. Realizing their temporary military tent lacks basic furniture prompts the alchemist to immediately reposition some heavy items. Watching him work diligently makes Kaylin smile warmly while fondly noting that her friend never really changes. Taking charge of the situation quickly has Kaylin loudly order her subordinates to fetch some fresh tea. The loyal guards immediately bow respectfully before swiftly exiting the large tent to fulfill her sudden command. Noting the sudden privacy makes the highly perceptive alchemist assume that serious trouble is currently brewing nearby. Smiling brightly at his sharp intuition proves to Kaylin that her brilliant friend remains incredibly reliable today. Rust heavily sighs in deep disappointment since he originally planned to simply relax while developing new land. Kaylin leans forward with intense seriousness to officially brief him regarding the terrifying impending regional monster threat. She dramatically explains how vicious monster attacks have recently surged uncontrollably across the entire northern borderland area. Listening carefully to her dire report makes Rust quietly evaluate the severe strategic disadvantages they currently face. He quickly deduces that securing their vast territory requires heavily fortifying the most vulnerable outer civilian settlements. Kaylin tightly grips her sword hilt while passionately vowing to fiercely protect every single innocent frightened villager. Staring into her fiercely determined eyes proves to Rust that she truly became an incredible military leader. Deciding to fully commit his immense skills encourages the young alchemist to enthusiastically join her dangerous cause. Pulling out an ancient parchment map allows the brilliant strategist to actively point out key defensive locations. They intensely collaborate on a master plan while carefully reviewing crucial defensive positions alongside the rushing river. Hearing a sudden strange rustling sound instantly distracts the young alchemist from their complex military planning map. The tiny rescued white lizard playfully scurries across their hard wooden floor seeking a comfortable warm spot. Spotting the shivering creature makes the highly compassionate alchemist immediately decide to build a cozy little bed. Reaching into his magical bag reveals a highly specialized scroll designed for manifesting a specific transmuted beast. Channeling powerful magical energy directly into the ancient scroll allows the young alchemist to initiate fast activation. A brilliant magical circle suddenly erupts outward as he confidently calls forth his beloved plant Familiar Rose. Emerging beautifully from the glowing light reveals a massive plant creature possessing incredibly sturdy thick wooden vines. Rust happily greets his loyal transmuted plant beast while gently commanding it to build a small bed. The incredibly versatile magical plant instantly stretches its thick vines outward to skillfully follow his precise orders. Weaving its sturdy branches together flawlessly allows the magical beast to form a perfectly shaped wooden basket. Placing the shivering white lizard gently inside the wooden basket provides it with instant comforting magical warmth. Turning his attention back to the tent encourages Rust to magically reinforce the fragile canvas structural supports. Commanding his plant beast again makes thick wooden roots actively spiral around the heavy metal tent poles. Providing extra structural integrity completely secures the large military tent against dangerously harsh freezing northern border winds. Rust smiles proudly at his handiwork while thanking his incredibly useful transmuted familiar for its vital assistance. Utilizing its incredible crafting abilities allows the magic plant to instantly grow a sturdy functional wooden table. The highly efficient beast quickly weaves matching chairs to perfectly complete the magnificent temporary outdoor laboratory setup. Admiring the beautifully crafted furniture proves that this magical creation drastically improves their overall harsh living conditions. Rust fondly remembers initially creating the brilliant plant beast during his early demanding magical academy study days. Recalling those chaotic student times reminds him how incredibly helpful Rose proved during rigorous outdoor fieldwork investigations. Her fantastic utility deeply impressed all his struggling classmates who desperately wanted their own magical plant beasts. Kaylin laughs loudly while happily remembering how she constantly tried stealing the incredibly useful transmuted plant creature. Smiling fondly at their shared memories leaves the brilliant alchemist feeling highly optimistic about tomorrow's upcoming challenges. Treating villagers as a provisional countermeasure, Rust hopes their symptoms will ultimately reveal the actual cause. Hearing a patient report sudden hand numbness since last night, Rust understands the concerning hidden possibility. Touching the affected limb slightly, the traveling alchemist realizes the serious problem requires immense speed tonight. The masked assistant rapidly brings the next sick patient inside as ROA urgently announces their arrival. The diligent masked assistant finally informs the focused alchemist that this is the absolute last patient. Thanking his incredibly swift pace, the grateful assistant notes they managed to successfully treat everyone today. Rust promises to quickly transmute a specialized potion to completely alleviate the severe numbness and fatigue. The brilliant alchemist reads their unique physical status to carefully prepare customized potions for each patient. Handing over the fresh healing drink, Rust urgently seeks to completely determine the exact disease origin. The thoroughly amazed patient successfully moves his hand again as the incredible potion immediately cures him. Overflowing with immense overwhelming joy, the fully healed villager happily thanks the young alchemist for everything. Rust humbly clarifies his true profession while silently reflecting on his completely unappreciated past association work. The disguised female commander steps forward to sincerely thank ROA for actively assisting with the treatments. The diligent young assistant simply replies that helping the sick villagers is merely his regular job. Handing over 2 sparkling magical vials, Rust generously provides potent fatigue-relieving potions for the masked sisters. Completely surprised by the sudden gift, the masked commander asks when he possibly brewed the potions. Rust admits he brewed them between patients as the younger masked sister suddenly dashes away quickly. Carefully reviewing his transcribed patient notes, Rust diligently prepares an urgent interim medical report for Kaylin. He plans to strategically discuss magic crystals while roughly summarizing his findings regarding the mysterious disease. Grateful local villagers sincerely thank the young alchemist outside his tent as the night turns dark. The astounded local men greatly marvel at his incredible speed in effectively treating everyone so fast. Rust happily realizes the suspicious villagers trust him much more now because of his medical contributions. Standing before the large military tent, the traveling alchemist politely announces his arrival to report findings. Opening the tent flap, Kaylin greets him warmly and curiously asks what brings him here tonight. Completely shocked by his extreme efficiency, Kaylin gasps as Rust hands over a simple medical report. Smiling proudly at her incredibly talented friend, Kaylin lovingly teases that he is still too much. Reading the detailed report carefully, she seriously acknowledges the alarming possibility of lingering after effects affecting villagers. Looking at him with immense gratitude, Kaylin sincerely thanks the young alchemist for saving her people. Hearing her short but emotionally loaded sentence fills the young alchemist with a profound dutiful pride. A sudden loud stomach growl hilariously interrupts them as Rust smoothly introduces his hungry traveling colleague. Laughing cheerfully at the completely unexpected noise, Kaylin happily suggests they all get something to eat. Ordering 2 quick light meals, Kaylin accurately guesses that Rust skipped eating proper food while working. She playfully scolds the master alchemist for exclusively eating those terrible portable grass bricks all day. Chuckling softly while wiping a tear, Rust happily admits he hasn't laughed this freely in ages. Shifting back to serious business, Kaylin eagerly asks him to elaborate on his detailed crystal report. The very next morning dawns brightly over the bustling campsite filled with various large military tents. Drinking from his warm cup, Rust munches a grass brick while watching the tiny lizard sleep. Stepping out of his tent, he completely startles the two masked sisters silently waiting just outside. Greeting them very politely, Rust confusedly wonders exactly how long they have been standing guard outside. The masked sisters formally thank the alchemist for the incredible fatigue potions he generously provided yesterday. The strict commander praises the potion, noting how a single mouthful completely vanished her severe fatigue. The loyal guards explain Kalen officially ordered them to guide him anywhere he wants to explore. Accepting their kind escort offer, Rust formally requests them to lead him directly toward the storehouse. Before fully departing, Rust confidently raises his hand to perform a quick magical summoning spell today. The massive beast bursts forth happily, causing the two strict masked sisters to flinch in surprise. Arriving at a securely padlocked wooden door, the loyal sisters present the official local food storehouse. Their commander explains this semi-basement storehouse was highly logically converted from an old dangerous monster nest. Rust politely asks his loyal beast to carefully investigate the immediate area for any suspicious anomalies. Taking charge of the serious investigation, the alchemist confidently activates a specialized magical instrument right now. A glowing crystal pendulum begins to brilliantly swing downward to strictly measure the surrounding magical density. Rust expertly activates the glowing dowsing pendulum to carefully measure surrounding ambient magic element concentrations. Initiating his thorough investigation, the determined alchemist begins meticulously circling the large underground food storehouse. The magical pendulum swings steadily as Rust carefully scans the dense dirt surrounding the structure. He logically deduces that highly concentrated magic elements completely prevent dangerous germs from surviving here. Sniffing the ground intensely, the faithful Hippopo eagerly tries assisting his master with the search. Finding nothing inherently unusual, Rust notes the heavy magical concentration remains completely normal around here. The young alchemist realizes remote regions deliberately utilize these dense magical spots for natural sterilization. He continues examining the stone walls closely, searching for any hidden clues regarding the sickness. The glowing pendulum begins swinging wildly as he approaches a particularly damp section of soil. Rust crouches down quickly to closely inspect the strange magical anomaly buried within the earth. He gently scoops a handful of dirt, sensing a bizarrely unnatural magical signature hidden within. Analyzing the tainted soil intensely, the brilliant alchemist quickly formulates a new working scientific hypothesis. Hippopo suddenly growls loudly, alerting his master to a strange scent lingering near the foundation. Following his loyal beast, Rust uncovers a tiny fissure leaking severely corrupted magical energy outward. He correctly identifies the bizarre leakage as the primary source contaminating the entire local area. Pulling out an empty glass vial, Rust carefully collects a corrupted soil sample for testing. He firmly seals the vial tightly, ensuring the dangerous magical contamination remains perfectly contained inside. Standing back up smoothly, the traveling alchemist securely stores the vital evidence within his pouch. Rust gently pats Hippopo on the head, sincerely thanking the massive beast for his assistance. Concluding the exterior investigation completely, Rust confidently prepares to report his vital new medical findings. The diligent investigator records his recent observations meticulously onto a floating magical transcription scroll nearby. He deeply ponders how the mysterious localized corruption specifically triggers sudden widespread numbness in villagers. Walking away from the storehouse slowly, Rust actively pieces their complex magical puzzle together mentally. The dedicated alchemist cross-references the strange symptoms with countless ancient medical texts stored inside his mind. He suddenly remembers a very similar magical phenomenon occurring during his early academy research days. A brilliant flash of sudden inspiration strikes the young alchemist as the crucial pieces connect. Rust enthusiastically clenches his fist, absolutely certain he finally understands the true nature of the disease. Eager to confirm his brilliant theory, he quickly decides to test the collected soil sample. He realizes he desperately needs a proper workspace before initiating the complex alchemical purification process. His stomach suddenly growls loudly, rudely interrupting his intense internal chain of complex scientific thought. The exhausted alchemist chuckles softly, acknowledging he completely forgot to eat during his rigorous investigation. Spotting the bustling camp cafeteria nearby, Rust happily decides to take a highly necessary break. He rapidly approaches the large dining tent, eager to consume some warm and comforting food. A sudden vivid memory regarding the specific disease origin abruptly flashes through his brilliant mind. Arriving at the busy cafeteria entrance, Rust cheerfully suggests they eat their meal right here. The friendly camp staff happily take his food order while preparing the standard military rations. Rust kindly asks his massive loyal beast if he wants to eat some delicious food too. He carefully prepares specialized magical stone powder pellets to perfectly balance Hippopo's internal magical elements. The massive beast eagerly wolfs down the custom food just as friendly colleagues suddenly return. Rust warmly welcomes his returning friends while preparing to enjoy the highly portable crushed cereal meal. Observing the crowded local cafeteria deeply reminds the curious alchemist of his bustling academy days. The two mysterious masked sisters sit completely silently while quietly munching their simple daily rations. Rust nervously notices the quiet masked sisters staring incredibly intensely at him while chewing food. The young alchemist curiously asks the masked guards if any newly afflicted patients recently appeared. He politely suggests the intense staring guards should definitely stop glaring fiercely while they eat. Their masked commander calmly confirms she has absolutely not noticed any common symptoms among patients. A sudden polite interruption from ROA quickly catches the highly focused traveling alchemist off guard. Rust thoughtfully realizes that an incredibly large number of the local afflicted villagers are single. A brilliant sudden realization regarding the 6 singles deeply strikes the highly intelligent young alchemist. ROA helpfully confirms she definitely brought the specific food directly from the crowded singles tent. Rust quickly deduces that something incredibly sinister connects the afflicted single villagers to this cafeteria. Activating his magical scroll immediately allows the brilliant alchemist to carefully transcribe the food composition. The powerful magical display brilliantly illuminates the air while rapidly analyzing the suspicious food mixture. Highly complex alchemical formulas instantly appear as the magical scroll violently processes the meal components. Staring intensely at the detailed magical analysis confirms the young alchemist finally found the culprit. Rust frantically screams at the two completely stunned masked sisters to stop eating their meals. He horrifyingly discovers dangerous monster poison expertly hidden inside the food affecting the nervous system. The terrified alchemist urgently commands absolutely everyone inside the crowded dining tent to stop eating. All their highly confused villagers instantly freeze completely while holding their half-eaten hot meals. One particularly bewildered villager stops moving entirely while gripping his warm bowl of suspicious soup. The completely silent dining hall stares blankly at the deeply distressed and frantic young alchemist. Rust glares intensely downward at the heavily contaminated liquid knowing it holds incredibly deadly secrets. The tainted mysterious soup sits silently inside the wooden bowl masking a highly lethal threat. Approaching the masked woman steadily, the young alchemist carefully confirms she manages the entire camp kitchen. Introducing himself formally as an investigating alchemist, Rust politely requests immediate access to the cooking facilities. Glaring at the glowing magical readings inside the kitchen confirms his highly suspicious and dreadful theory. Nodding with intense determination, the brilliant investigator urgently calls the assistant ROA for a vital message. Staring seriously at the attentive young woman, he firmly demands her immediate assistance with something important. Promising a full explanation later, he boldly instructs her to gather everyone at the command tent. Exactly 1 hour later, the entire worried leadership team gathers tightly inside the large military tent. Smiling warmly at her incredible friend, Kaelin cheerfully announces that he successfully solved the terrible epidemic. Rust calmly explains that a highly dangerous upstream monster heavily contaminated the local river with poison. He actively demonstrates how the ancient magical jug should logically purify all their contaminated drinking water. Their highly confused camp leaders quickly question why villagers still fall sick despite drinking purified water. Rust brilliantly deduces that dangerous unpurified river water used for simple domestic washing causes the sickness. A detailed diagram perfectly illustrates how washing clothes and daily tableware utilizes the heavily poisoned water. The horrified kitchen chief gasps as Rust reveals discovering deadly monster poison clinging to washed tableware. Kaelin finally understands how tiny invisible poison amounts slowly accumulated through skin contact and daily meals. Sweating profusely in deep shame, the devastated kitchen chief tearfully attempts to take full absolute responsibility. Raising her gloved hand gracefully, their compassionate female lord instantly halts his desperate and tearful apology. She gently explains that strictly rationing the highly limited purified water was her own strategic decision. Looking kindly at the trembling man, Kaelin warmly reassures him that this unfortunate tragedy is blameless. The determined commander boldly declares they must urgently hunt the upstream monster to eliminate the poison. Rust awkwardly interrupts the dramatic planning session to casually mention he already eliminated the deadly beast. The entire command group recoils in absolute shock upon hearing his incredibly sudden and unbelievable confession. Stammering nervously under their intense stares, the traveling alchemist awkwardly credits his loyal riding beast Hippopo. Staring blankly at her incredibly talented friend, Kaylin seriously questions if he magically sees the future. She marvels at his astonishing capability to flawlessly cure everyone and single-handedly slay the hidden monster. Their masked sister dryly mutters that his absurdly high competence borders on being downright offensive today. Rust strongly advises their command group to strictly avoid using unpurified river water for several days. He firmly instructs them to safely dispose of all currently stored washing water to prevent contamination. Confirming the incredible safety of the area with his loyal beast brings everyone immense lasting relief. Standing tall before his proud friend, the young alchemist formally reports his assigned task entirely completed. Placing her hand gracefully over her racing heart, the beautiful lord bows her head in gratitude. Kaylin passionately praises the young traveling alchemist for his completely remarkable and incredibly flawless medical work. She warmly expresses her deepest sincere gratitude for his actions far exceeding her wildest hopeful expectations. Rust warns that accumulated tiny poison quantities might still cause hidden latent sickness in more villagers. Pledging his ongoing medical support, the dedicated alchemist promises to carefully treat anyone feeling slightly unwell. Pointing upward confidently, he eagerly offers to greatly expand their water purification capabilities given proper funding. Laughing cheerfully at his bold financial request, Kaylin happily declares his highly successful first mission finished. The next morning brings bustling camp activity as Rust prepares to fully enjoy his borderland life. He silently worries about the corrupt association back home while staring at the incredibly busy camp. Removing her heavy facial mask gracefully reveals the stunningly beautiful older sister formally introducing herself today. Ari asks ROA for her thoughts while they walk through a quiet alley in the bustling capital city. They are currently exploring Porcelain Street to find a specific large water jug requested by Master Rust. Ari reflects that Rust's designated size for the alchemical water jug is actually quite incredibly massive today. From the first moment they met him, Ari sensed that Rust was absolutely not like normal people. She felt his immeasurable fighting power was truly shocking after realizing even his transmuted beast was too powerful. Ari assumes ROA has complex mixed feelings of intense admiration and burning jealousy for Rust's immense power. She believes they were the strongest under Lady Kaylin until the mysterious alchemist suddenly appeared in camp. ROA admits she originally wanted to test his combat strength when he first arrived with the White Lizard. She felt it was her duty to protect the camp while Rust remained a suspicious and unknown newcomer. Ari smiles while reminding ROA that their attempt to intimidate him failed completely because he was too strong. ROA looks away while remembering how Rust's overwhelming aura forced them to back down without a fight. They enter a specialized pottery shop to purchase the high-quality magical jug needed for the campsite. Ari explains to the shopkeeper that they require a vessel capable of holding extremely large volumes of liquid. The shopkeeper presents a grand ceramic container while boasting about its durability and superior alchemical purification properties. Inspecting the jug carefully, Ari confirms the material matches the specific requirements written in Rust's detailed list. ROA helps carry the heavy equipment while reflecting on how much the camp has changed recently. They discuss how the epidemic had paralyzed the borderland dominion before Rust arrived with his incredible medical skills. Ari recalls the dark days when everyone lived in constant fear of the mysterious and debilitating numbness. Numerous famous healers had visited the camp, but tragically they all eventually gave up in complete despair. Lady Kaylin had desperately called for any available healers long before the young master alchemist finally arrived. Rumors began spreading that the disease was a divine curse causing many terrified people to flee immediately. Master Rust suddenly appeared in their desperate camp as if falling directly from the heavens to save them. He immediately began treating the sick villagers with an efficiency that was truly beyond any normal human standards. Ari remembers the shock of seeing patients recover so quickly after just one mouthful of his potion. They split up to rapidly transport the most suffering patients directly to Rust's small temporary medical tent. ROA and Ari diligently followed every single specific instruction provided by Lady Kaylin to assist the alchemist. They searched for sick individuals and took them to his tent, where they all left looking perfectly well. Not to mention that Rust single-handedly slew the monstrous upstream entity that was actually poisoning the water. Ari looks at the sky while marveling at how one man completely transformed their entire hopeless situation. Roa silently acknowledges that her initial suspicion was completely wrong and she now deeply respects his abilities. They finally reach the camp gates while carrying the new alchemical supplies for the upcoming water expansion. The soldiers on guard duty greet them warmly while asking if Master Rust is ready to work. Ari confirms they found the perfect jug and that the Master Alchemist will begin the expansion soon. They walk toward the command tent to report their successful procurement mission directly to Lady Kaelin. Inside the tent, Rust is busy reviewing reports while the tiny white lizard sleeps peacefully nearby him. Kaelin looks up and smiles brightly upon seeing her two strongest warriors returning with the necessary equipment. She praises their hard work while emphasizing that securing clean water is their top priority right now. Rust inspects the new jug and confirms it is exactly what he needs for the purification array. He thanks Ari and Roa for their assistance while preparing his magical scrolls for the next transmutation. The masked sisters stand back to observe as the alchemist begins chanting his complex and powerful spells. A brilliant magical light fills the tent as the purification features of the jug are being enhanced. Rust explains that this new system will provide enough clean water for the entire growing borderland population. Ari and Roa watch in absolute awe as the ceramic vessel begins to glow with intense energy. The transmutation is a success and the Master Alchemist wipes sweat from his brow with a smile. Kaelin declares that with this new technology their dominion will finally prosper and become a safe haven. The masked sisters realize their true purpose is to support this man as he builds a new future. As the sun sets over the borderland, a new sense of hope and security fills the entire camp. Sweating profusely in deep distress, Rihalzam stares forward while completely overwhelmed by a suddenly terrible situation. Walking through the heavily cluttered storage room, the frustrated man loudly complains about the absolutely disgusting stench. The completely furious master angrily blames Rust for suddenly quitting and causing this massive unexpected association trouble. Proceeding through the dangerous special vault, Rihalzam notes highly volatile monster materials desperately require extremely careful maintenance. He suddenly remembers the former basic research administrator was unfairly fired recently due to highly strict budget cuts. Neglecting the highly dangerous storage directly caused incredibly thick scavenger slime fluids to explode violently everywhere today. Desperate subordinates loudly scream for their master because entering the hazardous vault absolutely requires a master rank. An extremely anxious underling urgently interrupts the busy master to announce a highly important visiting angry executive. Hearing this completely shocking sudden news absolutely terrifies the highly stressed and extremely unprepared corrupt department master. Angrily screaming at his incompetent underling, Rihalzam desperately demands why he was not informed about this immediately. The deeply panicked master absolutely dreads meeting the extremely important client while completely covered in disgusting slime. Reaching forward quickly, the nervous young underling actively prepares to securely seal the incredibly dangerous vault doors. The highly frustrated assistant quickly realizes he entirely lacks the required master medallion to properly close it. Defeated and completely helpless, the young associate slowly decides to simply wait nearby for someone to return. Deep inside the unsecured dark vault, the volatile and incredibly dangerous slime continues bubbling violently without supervision. The incredibly muscular and furious Arms Association executive violently screams about the totally unacceptable delayed military supply. Aggressively threatening a severe penalty, the highly intimidating vice president fiercely demands his promised military equipment immediately. Completely terrified by the massive screaming executive, a nervous assistant desperately hopes his corrupt master arrives soon. Rushing into the grand room, the heavily sweating master profoundly apologizes for making the important executive wait. Stepping backward in utter shock, the massively imposing executive deeply cringes at the completely unexpected foul stench. Completely disgusted by the horrible smell, the visiting clients aggressively command the deeply confused master to halt. The incredibly furious executive violently demands to know why a prestigious master absolutely reeks of foul garbage. Sniffing his own sleeve carefully, the totally embarrassed master realizes the simple deodorant spray absolutely failed him. Clenching his massive fists tightly, the enraged visiting client aggressively asks if the stinking alchemist is mocking him. Showered by a highly aggressive stream of verbal insults, the completely humiliated master promises to change immediately. Refusing any further pathetic delays, the extremely angry client violently screams that he absolutely will not wait. Staring forward in total terrified disbelief, the heavily sweating master completely struggles to desperately process the demand. Spinning around desperately, the entirely panicked master frantically demands a progress update from his highly nervous assistant. Hoping to completely calm the deeply enraged client, the terrified assistant frantically promises a full delivery tomorrow. Pointing a massive aggressive finger, the absolutely furious executive strongly warns them not to forget this promise. Realizing tomorrow is absolutely impossible, their completely devastated duo gathers tired apprentices inside the large alchemy laboratory. Their highly confused and deeply annoyed apprentices quietly wonder why they were suddenly summoned on their day off. Glaring incredibly fiercely at his nervous subordinate, the extremely stressed master silently demands a proper full explanation. The sweating assistant nervously explains the army urgently needs highly specialized magic circuits that instantly create fire. He desperately clarifies that they totally lack the extremely high-quality distilled water absolutely required for manufacturing. Completely furious at this simple excuse, the arrogant master screams that making distilled water is incredibly basic. Staring downwards in awkward complete silence, the gathered young apprentices simply do not know how to properly respond. The confused assistant slowly presents a completely finished magic circuit board and a highly specialized checking device. Snatching the mechanical device aggressively, the completely enraged master fiercely demands to clearly know what the problem is. Activating the complex device fiercely, the extremely arrogant alchemist carelessly attempts to forcibly convert the magical energy. Rihalzam notices the unstable emission of magical energy from the crystal while their mechanical device sparks and smokes uncontrollably. Their nervous assistant confirms the power shortage while suggesting they could really use Master Rust's superior distilled water instead. Hearing the forbidden name, the arrogant master aggressively slams his desk while screaming never to mention that detestable person. The gathered apprentices watch in awkward silence while realizing their master's intense jealousy towards Rust is truly beyond charts. Rihalzam fiercely commands them to finish the circuits immediately while boasting his water will eventually surpass his former rivals. Several hours of grueling labor pass before the exhausted apprentices finally present the newly finished batch of distilled water. The skeptical assistant measures the values while noting they are barely reaching the absolute minimum required safety norms today. The apprentice warns that these low safety margins significantly increase the dangerous risk of a catastrophic alchemical accident occurring. He reflects silently that Master Rust's water was vastly superior while Rihalzam took significantly longer to produce this product. The arrogant master ignores the warnings while dismissively ordering his tired subordinates to continue working much faster and harder. Near midnight, our exhausted apprentice leans against the hallway wall while vaguely feeling like he forgot something very important. Suddenly, a massive explosion rocks the facility as a violent tidal wave of slime bursts through the vault doors. The horrified apprentice realizes the unsealed vault door allowed the scavenger slime to absorb ambient magic and start moving. The acidic slime grows significantly larger as it greedily consumes materials while melting the heavy metal doors with ease. Desperate to stop the disaster, the panicking apprentices decide to attack the monster with a magic circuit checking device. A brilliant magical blast connects with the monster as the apprentice successfully activates the improvised offensive alchemical weapon today. Rihalzam arrives at the chaotic scene while realizing the explosion likely destroyed the expensive magic circuits meant for army. The massive impact sends the master flying backward as he hilariously lands directly into a pile of disgusting slime. Apprentices watch in horror as their slimy master struggles while someone urgently suggests they should probably go for help. Their master looks completely pathetic while covered in slime as his underlings debate whether they should even bother helping. Sitting in the middle of the mess, Rihalzam realizes his reputation is likely ruined along with the military contracts. An apprentice wonders if Master Rust could have handled this situation better while their laboratory continues to smell horribly. Their master frantically wipes slime off his face while his apprentices look on with mixed expressions of deep pity. Someone asks if Rust can see the future since he left just before this massive disaster finally occurred here. Kalen reviews the reports while marveling at how Rust finished everything in one night and defeated the monster too. The masked sister comments that Rust's high standards are almost offensive compared to the local alchemist's poor performance. Rust continues his explanation while advising everyone to avoid using unpurified river water for the next few days. He emphasizes the need to dispose of all contaminated cleaning water immediately to ensure the villagers' long-term safety. Confirming the monster pond is clear, Rust tells Kalen that the water source will be safe very soon. Bowing respectfully, the young alchemist formally reports that he has successfully completed every single task assigned by Kalen. Kaylin looks away while blushing slightly before turning back to face her incredibly talented and reliable childhood friend. She praises his remarkable work on the disease while acknowledging that his results far exceeded her initial hopeful expectations. Looking into his eyes, the beautiful lord expresses her deepest sincere gratitude for his vital help saving her people. Rust warns that more people might fall sick due to accumulated poison, requiring constant monitoring of the village health. He pledges to continue treating everyone while asking Kaylin to encourage villagers to report any sudden physical changes immediately. Changing the subject, Rust proposes expanding the water purification system if Kaylin can provide a proper research budget today. Kaylin smiles brightly while agreeing to the budget, officially bringing a successful close to the Alchemist's first major mission. The next morning brings bustling camp activity as Rust prepares to fully enjoy his new life in Borderland. They walk through their busy camp together while the narrator reflects on the ongoing troubles within the distant association. Ari removes her mask and introduces herself again as a loyal servant of the Admiral Dominion under Lady Kaylin. Rust looks surprised by her appearance while she explains her background and her dedicated service to their mutual friend. She explains that her role involves protecting the Dominion while assisting with important administrative tasks for the young lord. Rust smiles while acknowledging her dedication before they continue walking towards the newly established Borderland development site today. Kaylin watches them from a distance while reflecting on how much Rust has already changed the fate of land. She remembers her school days and how Rust was always a nice man obsessed with his alchemical research projects. Kaylin feels incredibly grateful that Rust decided to join her Dominion immediately after receiving her sudden and urgent letter. She watches as he starts his day early as usual, preparing to gather materials for his next alchemical experiments. Looking at the sunrise, Kaylin silently thanks Rust for his help and promises to support his future research endeavors. She declares her intention to get him anything he wants as long as it helps the Dominion prosper further. Rust looks at her with a confused expression, wondering why she is making such a grand declaration so suddenly. Kaylin advises him to rely more on those around him instead of trying to carry every single burden alone. She observes that while doing everything himself is a quality, it is also a fault that might cause strain. Kaylin worries that the constant strain of overworking will eventually come back to negatively affect his health and body. She firmly tells him to rely on his comrades while promising to create an environment where he can thrive. Rust looks at her with a soft smile while acknowledging that his childhood friend has truly become a leader. Kaylin playfully slaps his back, causing him to shout in pain as she laughs about counting on his help. The narrator concludes that Kaylin works hard every early morning to make her long nights feel a little shorter. Smiling with intense determination, Kaylin declares they will work hard again today to build a better future together here. Smiling brightly under the clear sky, Rust cheerfully declares he is finally heading back home today. He happily reflects that Kaylin generously provided the entire budget needed for the water storage problem. The young alchemist proudly confirms he prepared the absolute perfect scrolls for hunting various dangerous monsters. Riding his loyal beast across the dusty plains, Rust confidently announces they have almost reached camp. Entering the bustling campsite, the highly relieved villagers eagerly gather around to warmly welcome him back. Raising his hand in friendly greeting, Rust instantly notices the villagers feeling extremely excited about water. Walking towards the food supply manager, Rust politely states he actually wants to discuss something important. The generous alchemist cheerfully explains he brought back edible monster parts to heavily boost their food. Highly ecstatic about this generous offer, Littner enthusiastically agrees to purchase all the fresh monster meat. When asked where to place the goods, Rust casually points toward an open spot right nearby. A massive crowd of deeply curious villagers quickly gathers closely around the noisy monster butchering station. Glancing nervously at the massive gathering, Rust awkwardly realizes absolutely everyone is intensely curious about him. Telling the eager crowd to wait patiently, Rust swiftly prepares to reveal his massive hidden catch. Utilizing his immense magical skills, the brilliant alchemist dramatically activates a powerful storage scroll right now. A gigantic defeated beast suddenly materializes from the glowing magical scroll, causing a massive dramatic impact. Smiling proudly at his highly impressive catch, the young alchemist casually asks if Littner will buy. The completely astounded villagers gasp in absolute shock upon recognizing the incredibly dangerous twin-horn beasts. Marveling at the absolutely pristine condition of the beasts, Littner urgently commands his men to help. Reaching into his glowing magical scroll again, Rust cheerfully announces he has plenty more fresh beasts. Detailed records carefully describe the various unique magical monsters commonly found across this extremely dangerous region. Sweating profusely, the deeply overwhelmed food manager loudly complains that this massive haul is simply too much. The incredibly skilled alchemist easily extracts countless terrifying beasts from his highly advanced magical storage scroll. A highly experienced warrior stares intently at an entirely unknown bizarre monster resting on the ground. Deeply impressed by these hunting skills, the fierce warrior strongly declares his eager desire to fight. Feeling extremely awkward around the aggressive warrior, Rust hastily excuses himself while quickly walking away fast. Arriving back at his personal tent, the exhausted alchemist warmly greets his loyal transmuted plant beast. Inspecting the small resting creature, Rust happily confirms Rose correctly administered all the required healing potions. He feels immensely relieved, noting the little creature remains stable without any terrible sudden condition worsening. Treating magical beasts remains incredibly difficult because standard human potions absolutely cannot be used on them. Trusting his meticulous plant familiar completely, Rust kindly asks her to continue closely monitoring the patient. Stepping outside his tent, Rust eagerly inspects the massive new ceramic water jugs resting right there. He sincerely thanks ROA for her incredibly hard work in carefully transporting the heavy equipment here. Finding absolutely zero scratches on the beautiful jugs, Rust curiously asks if she experienced any trouble. Looking slightly concerned, ROA seriously explains that the general atmosphere across the capital felt deeply tense. She anxiously adds that many basic commodities are rapidly becoming far too expensive for common people. Rust calmly reassures her that Kalen definitely knows about these concerning issues and will handle them. Far away in the distant corrupt association, an incredibly jealous Rihalzam suddenly lets out a sneeze. Instructing his assistant to step back, Rust confidently prepares to install the highly advanced purification feature. Levitating several powerful scrolls flawlessly, the master alchemist beautifully initiates his incredibly complex magical transmutation process. Utilizing the powerful polishing spell, Rust expertly generates a fierce magical tornado to adjust the elements. Rust grinds a magic stone to dust while the diamond dust density is set to maximum. Rust releases magic energy to maintain purity before adding perfectly pure water into the mixture. Entropy increases as the pure water melts the magic stone powder under the laws of physics. Rust successfully creates a specialized solution to write magic circuits on the large water jugs. Ari watches the alchemist's work with intense admiration while the magical energy floats around him. Rust releases the constraints of gravity on the target solution while preparing the next alchemical step. Rust performs an index search to implement the water purification circuit from his ancient magical book. A detailed water purification circuit is transcribed into reality as glowing magic fills the air. Rust projects the magical solution onto the jug's surface to begin the final distribution process. The magic circuit becomes a permanent part of the jug as Rust expertly fixates the energy. Rust completes the device by sticking a powerful magic crystal inside to provide constant energy. Rust smiles confidently while preparing to perform the same complex transmutation on the second jug. Ari's eyes glow intensely behind her mask as she observes the incredible flow of magic. Rust explains he is just beginning his work while the camp uses the new purified water. Rust notes that the jugs currently only hold water and require significantly more magical functionality. Rust plans to create another magic item to eliminate the need for manually carrying water. Ari is completely shocked that Rust can perform such an advanced and potentially dangerous feat. Rust encourages Ari to follow him so he can demonstrate his latest innovative alchemical invention. Rust asks Hipopo to check for any nearby danger while they approach the quiet pond. Rust prepares to draw water from the pond using a specialized magic item he created. Rust shows off a device made from scrap materials and monster parts to draw water. Hipopo splashes in the pond while Rust watches his loyal beast during the quiet break. Rust realizes only small monsters remain in the pond since the boss was recently defeated. Rust explains that the device uses a specific magic stone from a very rare monster. Rust recalls visiting a boiling volcano to find the magic stone required for this specific device. Rust identifies the monster as a paralyzing cloud while they sit by the calm pond water. Rust explains the paralyzing cloud is incredibly dangerous because standard physical attacks always fail against it. Rust sets the device to provide feedback if the pond water level ever drops too low. Rust activates the complex device while glowing magical circles manifest around the floating stone. Rust calls his invention a cloud-style water distribution device as it begins its operation. The device begins turning the liquid pond water into floating clouds that rise into the sky. Rust explains that using the monster's magic stone keeps the water processing costs extremely low. The magic stone rewrites the laws of physics to control the clouds and prevent dissipation. Rust clarifies that the paralyzing cloud's actual body is the magic stone inside his device. The water clouds gather together and move through the sky toward their camp destination jugs. Once the clouds reach the camp, they turn back into water through a second magic circle. Ari finds the idea of carrying water through the sky completely unbelievable and incredibly impressive. Rust invites ROA to mess with the cloud to see its resistance to physical attacks. ROA swings her spear through the cloud, but it simply passes through without any effect. Rust explains the clouds are resistant to disturbances, which makes them ideal for safe transport. Rust notes that monsters would easily break water pipes in this remote and dangerous region. Rust asks ROA if she finds the clouds interesting while she watches them float away. Rust decides they should head back to camp now that the successful demonstration is over. Inside the bustling communications room of the Alchemist Association, a blonde alchemist stared in sheer disbelief at a document he held. A frantic, balding man suddenly interrupted, demanding the paper from Tsubasa with a desperate shout. The balding man scrutinized the contents of the paper as a cold sweat broke out across his face. Tsubasa simply nodded with a tired expression while the older man began to tremble with growing panic. Tsubasa explained that massive quantities of old-style magic crystals were inexplicably circulating through the market. The balding man exploded in denial, screaming that such an influx of outdated crystals was entirely impossible. He frantically reasoned that while a small amount could be smuggled, a large-scale operation was impossible since imports were completely blocked. Desperately searching for an explanation, he began to suspect that someone within their own ranks might be responsible. He angrily declared that any association traitor would be instantly banished and that no unlicensed alchemist possessed the necessary skill for such a feat. Exhausted by the unfolding crisis, Tsubasa casually raised his hand and announced his resignation on the spot. The older man froze in terror as a dreadful realization about the true culprit finally dawned on him. Tsubasa grimly reported that clients were abandoning their new-style crystals in droves, threatening to leave the association with a mountain of dead stock. Across the noisy room, other association members began to murmur in confusion about the commotion and their plummeting sales figures. Staring down the terrified executive, Tsubasa bluntly confirmed that their financial situation was already deep in the red. The executive clutched his head in absolute despair, repeating that such a devastating financial ruin simply could not be happening. Refusing to accept defeat, he angrily vowed to swallow his pride and begged the exiled Rust to return. Just then, an urgent voice called out for Master Rihalzam, breaking his tense concentration. A nervous subordinate interrupted to warn Rihalzam that an incredibly furious chief was demanding his immediate presence. Panicking, Rihalzam ordered Tsubasa to fix the situation, only to be flatly told that absolutely nothing could be done. Rihalzam's frustrated curses echoed across the Grand Association building as the reality of his failure set in. As he seethed with endless resentment, Rihalzam obsessively cursed Rust's name over and over again in a blinding fury. Far away from the city, a small, weary group trudged through a quiet, windswept wilderness. The harsh crunch of footsteps broke the serene silence as the group ventured deeper into the untamed territory. Rihalzam gasped heavily for breath, utterly exhausted while leading a gang of unsavory mercenaries through the dense forest. He bitterly recalled the chief's absolute order, cursing his miserable fate with every heavy step. The chief's furious mandate echoed in his mind, commanding him to personally drag the exiled alchemist back to the association. Sweating profusely, Rihalzam grumbled over being forced to take full responsibility for the catastrophic market collapse. He angrily lamented having to spend his own money on pathetic, delinquent bodyguards just to survive the journey. One of the mercenaries questioned their treacherous path, prompting a defensive and irritated snap from the disgraced executive. Rihalzam quickly deflected the question and confirmed that his hired thugs were fully prepared for their dark mission. He proudly showed off a custom magic gun of his own design, boasting about its elemental changing circuits. With a sinister grin, the mercenary confirmed their cowardly plan to ambush Rust from behind and burn him to ash. Rihalzam coldly instructed them to lure Rust out and assassinate him, planning to let wild monsters consume the evidence. To ensure their silence, he promised to split Rust's presumed vast fortune evenly among the greedy brothers. The thugs laughed with cruel overconfidence, entirely convinced that murdering a weak shut-in would be incredibly easy. Complaining about the blistering heat and the monster-infested wilderness, Rihalzam blamed all of his current suffering entirely on rust. He frustratingly recalled how recording protocols forced this miserable personal expedition, completely underestimating the dangerous, sound-sensitive wildlife surrounding them. Rihalzam barked an order to one of his men right as a horrifying, spiked serpent suddenly lunged from the underbrush. Unfazed by the terrifying beast, one of the thugs casually dismissed the small serpent as a minor nuisance. Drawing his newly acquired magic pistol with a confident smirk, the mercenary prepared to obliterate the approaching monster. A single, explosive shot rang out through the forest as the magic weapon easily blew the serpent's head apart. The arrogant mercenaries chuckled in victory, bragging that Rihalzam's custom magic guns made them completely invincible. Their loud celebration tragically backfired as the noise immediately attracted a fresh, terrifying swarm of the highly sensitive beasts. The smug confidence completely drained from the thugs' faces as they realized they were rapidly being surrounded by an overwhelming number of monsters. Rihalzam shrieked at his men to remove the elemental circuits immediately, warning that the guns would drain their magical energy far too quickly. Panic fully set in as the relentless monsters continued to pour from the shadows without end. Disaster struck when an overtaxed weapon catastrophically misfired, severely burning one of the screaming mercenaries in the face. The chaotic clearing filled with screams and erratic gunfire as the massive swarm of beasts ruthlessly closed in on the panicked group. A terrified mercenary stared at his useless weapon in pure horror as it finally ran completely out of magical ammunition. The desperate thugs begged their employer for spare crystals and working weapons to fend off the encroaching slaughter. With bulging eyes, Rihalzam screamed over the terrifying din that he had absolutely no spare ammunition left. A suffocating silence fell over the doomed mercenaries as Rihalzam stubbornly crossed his arms in bitter defiance. Realizing they were being left to die, the cowardly thugs immediately abandoned their weapons and prepared to flee for their lives. The disgraced executive shrieked in furious disbelief as his hired muscle cowardly sprinted away into the woods. Left completely alone with the encroaching beasts, Rihalzam grimaced in disgust at having to engage such weak creatures personally. Preparing for a desperate battle, he aggressively threw his arm forward and commanded his hidden magic to activate. Brilliant geometric arrays materialized in the air around him as he initiated a powerful interdimensional connection. Thrusting his hand into the portal, Rihalzam screamed in horrific pain as he forcibly merged his own flesh with a parasitic transmuted beast. His right arm violently mutated into a massive, grotesque weapon of destruction bursting with raw magical power. Glaring at the trembling serpents with murderous intent, Rihalzam roared a final, hateful challenge at the little bugs. For some twisted reason, Rihalzam's transmuted beasts were all parasitic hyphae that painfully lodged deep within his own body. This brutal transformation was his only method of attack, and because of the agonizing pain he screamed out while unleashing it, he absolutely despised having to participate in battle. Suddenly, a terrifying burst of energy erupted from the mutated limb as he prepared to fight for his life. A sickening squelch echoed through the forest as the monstrous appendage fully materialized into a grotesque weapon. Panting heavily from the immense physical toll, Rihalzam groaned as the massive swarm of spiked serpents slithered closer with menacing intent. Roaring in absolute fury at the encroaching bugs, he prepared to unleash his horrifying new power upon them. He violently swiped his massive claw at the endless tide of beasts while cursing the bugs for appearing one after the other. A sudden shriek of agony escaped his lips as a serpent ruthlessly sank its fangs right into his vulnerable thigh. Shocked and outraged that a mere beast managed to bite him, Rihalzam cursed loudly while recoiling from the piercing pain. Sneering with burning contempt, he violently swatted the creature away and branded it a pathetic weakling. Assuming a simple potion would heal the wound, his confident smirk quickly vanished as he noticed something horrifyingly wrong with the bite mark. Having seemingly cleared the immediate area of threats, he surveyed the bloody clearing and noted that most of the swarm was finally dead. Groaning from the lingering poison in his veins, he desperately conjured a glowing magical array to sever the horrific parasitic connection to his arm. Falling to his knees in the quiet forest, Rihalzam screamed into the sky that this absolute disaster was entirely that exiled alchemist's fault. Chugging a healing potion to soothe his immense pain, he venomously vowed to lure Rust back to the association with false hope before utterly crushing him. A sinister and echoing chuckle escaped his lips as he sat alone in the wilderness and promised a brutal revenge against Rust. Meanwhile, far away in a peaceful clearing, Rust cheerfully declared that he was about to perform one of the most essential tasks for an alchemist in a developing region. He explained that since high magical concentrations mutate crops into monsters, a true alchemist must carefully extract those elements from the soil and safely expel them into the atmosphere. Surveying the roughly plowed land, he noted that he simply needed to dig small, hand-sized holes to begin the purification process. Testing the dirt with his bare hands, Rust mused that although the ground was slightly tough, he could easily dig through it. Realizing his beast companion wanted to help, Rust happily praised Hippopo for eagerly taking over the heavy digging wherever he left a mark. Standing proudly beside his exhausted but loyal friend, Rust expressed his gratitude and decided the massive field was finally ready for the next step. Holding a glowing and specialized plant bulb, he prepared to bury the transmuted items to draw out the dangerous ambient magic. Rust gently patted Hippopo and thanked him again while noting that the delicate magical tuning was a bit too complex for the helpful beast. Channeling his energy into a massive floating scroll, Rust initiated the magical diversion sequence and confidently confirmed that there were 0 energy leaks. Instantly, countless glowing geometric arrays materialized across the barren field to synchronize with the buried bulbs. Rust smiled brightly as the radiant magical constructs began successfully siphoning the excess energy into the sky. Watching the smooth operation unfold, he reminded himself to carefully monitor the flow so they would not completely drain the soil of all its vital energy. Suddenly, a strange sensation caught his attention and caused him to pause in quiet confusion. He immediately thought of his stoic, glasses-wearing companion and wondered what she was up to. Rust gently touched his clothing as he recalled receiving a very special magical item from her as a token of gratitude. He remembered how Ari had earnestly presented him with a unique protective charm that had been passed down in her hometown. Blushing softly in the sweet memory, Ari had shyly nodded when Rust asked if she had personally hand-knitted the intricate garment. Her silent and embarrassed nod had filled the quiet moment with a deep sense of mutual warmth and unspoken affection. She had carefully explained that the special magical threads could be safely severed whenever absolutely necessary. Although Rust was deeply touched by the heartfelt gift, he had playfully questioned how cutting the garment actually made it function as a protective charm. Shaking away the fond memory, Rust sat down comfortably next to Hippopo and decided to read an ancient research paper while the field purified. Unfurling his massive scroll, he quickly located a fascinating comparative study detailing how magic concentrations specifically affect planted wheat. Knowing Rihalzam's corrupt administration would likely destroy the old archives, Rust felt incredibly relieved that he had secretly transcribed every basic research document before his exile. He became entirely engrossed in a theory suggesting that retaining a tiny amount of magic in the soil actually tricks the human brain into perceiving the harvested food as significantly more delicious. Diving deeper into their complex archives, he found another brilliant study linking trace magical ingestion directly to positive effects on the human body. His deep concentration was suddenly broken when Hippopo nudged him to signal that the extraction process was finally complete. Just as Rust praised his companion for the perfect timing, Ari suddenly rushed over the hill to announce that an unexpected visitor had arrived. Her normally calm expression was strained as she urgently warned him that the new arrival felt incredibly dangerous. Feeling the sudden shift in tension, Rust seriously asked her if the ominous intruder had provided a name. With a cold and deeply troubled gaze, Ari revealed that the despised executive Rihalzam had actually tracked them down. A massive wave of dread washed over them as the infuriated and heavily scarred executive finally arrived to unleash his furious revenge. A menacing grin stretched across Rihalzam's face as he stood in silent confidence. Rust stroked his chin with a troubled expression and admitted he had a bad feeling about the situation while asking his companion to explain further as they headed back. Suddenly interrupting his thoughts, Ari politely excused herself with a questioning look. She firmly warned Rust to hold on tight because she was going to significantly speed up their mount. Rust watched in amazement as the landscape blurred past them and noted their incredibly fast pace. Looking closely at the smooth ride over the rough wasteland, he wondered if their mount was adjusting its speed to prevent shaking while muttering about Rihalzam's current state. Gazing up at the cloudy sky, Rust explained that he expected this trouble because his former Alchemist Association colleague was likely after the magic crystals. Rust then turned to Ari with a gentle smile and asked if there was something specific on her mind. Ari stared blankly ahead and confessed that her vision of the future was unclear, but she could definitively sense an impending battle that was far more serious than a simple fight. She described a chaotic battlefield that kept appearing and disappearing before warning him that a massive warlike conflict was approaching. Continuing their swift journey across the barren landscape, Rust curiously asked how her new monocle was functioning. She confidently replied that the perfect magic item he gave her was exactly why she could currently see the signs of this upcoming fight. Rust quietly mused to himself that Ari had answered his question before he could even finish it and concluded that the magic item was working flawlessly without any bugs. Seeking clarification on the impending danger, Rust asked if her vision meant that he and Rihalzam would inevitably fight. With a grave expression on her face, Ari confirmed that their clash was almost completely certain. Riding closely behind him, Ari admitted she had never felt such an overwhelming sensation before and hinted that there was still more to the vision. Glancing down with a troubled gaze, she softly apologized to Rust for the grim news. Rust quickly reassured her not to apologize and sincerely thanked her for sharing their vital information. Suddenly, a sharp spark erupted from Ari's monocle and caused her to gasp in surprise. Staring into a swirling vortex of energy, a mysterious voice declared that a turning point of fate was approaching and that Master Rust's crucial choice was imminent. A glowing crystalline structure materialized as their voice explained that both the best and worst choices carried equal weight in deciding this turning point of fate. As fate began fragmenting and running wild, a vision of a shaman's hand and two men standing in the wind-blown wasteland flashed before her eyes. Realizing the danger, Rust anxiously noticed that intense magical elements were wildly swirling inside Ari's eye and overloading the monocle. Rust panicked as sparks flew from the device while noting that the monocle's processing speed was at its absolute limit, trying to keep up with Ari's magic eye. He watched in sheer awe as he wondered just how far ahead she could see and realized her future sight magic went incredibly beyond his highest expectations. A sudden cracking sound echoed in the air as the immense magical pressure caused Ari's monocle to violently shatter across her face. Rust immediately spun around in alarm as Ari slumped forward and completely lost consciousness from the severe magical backlash. Catching her frail body in his arms, Rust desperately shouted for Ari to hang on. Slowly opening her exhausted eyes, Ari weakly called out to Master Rust as the magical sparks finally faded. Looking up at him through her broken glasses, she gently thanked him for his concern and reassured him that she was all right now. Rust observed her recovering state and quietly noted that her overwhelming future sight ability had thankfully stopped. He realized that her magic eye placed a much bigger burden on her body than he originally thought and warmly told her not to worry anymore. With absolute determination burning in his eyes, Rust vowed to protect everyone no matter what dark fate tried to bring upon them. He gently touched her cheek and whispered that she was family after all. Touched by his heartfelt words, Ari offered a soft smile and simply agreed with a quiet yes. Getting back into position, Rust instructed her to hang on tight because they were going back to full speed to reach their destination quickly. Upon arriving at the bustling camp, an anxious woman armed with a spear urgently waved Master Rust over to her location. Rust confirmed he was on his way and asked the weary Ari what she planned to do since she was clearly not feeling well. Despite her shattered monocle and lingering exhaustion, Ari firmly declared that she needed to see this conflict through to the very end. Rust wondered if she had seen something specific with her transparency power right before she seriously warned him to be careful of an evil presence lurking inside Rihalzam. Rust approached the heavy warrior Kaelin and mentally noted that her specialized meteoric iron armor was designed entirely to increase her attack power rather than for defense. Kaelin gripped her massive sword and acknowledged Rust's arrival right as he apologized for keeping everyone waiting. The small group stood united in the desolate wasteland as they finally faced the imposing figure of the disgraced executive. A dark and sinister chuckle escaped Rihalzam's lips as he menacingly stared down his former colleague. Rust calmly analyzed the situation and decided that a master-rank alchemist like Rihalzam would likely be too much for Kaelin's physical combat specialization to handle. Stepping forward with confident resolve, Rust raised his hand to signal his waiting allies. He firmly commanded everyone to step back and declared that he would personally take over the fight. The tense standoff continued across the cracked earth as Kaelin and Ari obediently retreated behind their fearless leader. Rihalzam sneered with triumphant malice and loudly proclaimed that Master Rust had finally arrived to meet his destiny. Ignoring the villain's dramatic flair, Rust plainly stated that something smelled awful and bluntly asked Master Rihalzam what his business was in this wasteland. Rihalzam gritted his teeth in extreme irritation at Rust's completely dismissive and disrespectful tone. Regaining his arrogant composure, Rihalzam announced that the president was officially bringing back the basic research department and demanded that Rust rejoice at the offer to return to the prestigious association. Stretching out his horrifically mutated arm, the executive sadistically asked if Rust was happy about this incredible honor and urged him to come back. Rust stared blankly at the disgusting appendage and immediately rejected the offer with a simple and flat refusal. Rihalzam's eyes bulged in pure shock and utter disbelief at the immediate rejection. Rust calmly explained that while the disbandment of his department started this mess, he actually quit because he wanted to and felt he could advance his research much better out here. Dismissing the entire conversation, Rust coldly told Rihalzam to leave immediately if that was all he came to say. A violent tremor shook Rihalzam's body as he let out a frustrated grunt and sneered at the blatant disrespect. Throwing his head back in absolute madness, Rihalzam erupted into a terrifying fit of maniacal laughter that echoed across the barren landscape. The disturbing sound forced Kaelin and Ari to brace themselves as Rihalzam's creepy smile widened. Chuckling darkly to himself, the deranged executive casually muttered that this violent outcome simply could not be helped. He aggressively initiated his magical activation sequence and roared that he was going to utterly crush Rust. Recognizing the massive surge of magical energy, Rust frantically screamed for everyone to stand further back while Rihalzam finalized his horrific activation. Ari urgently warned Rust about the sudden change in their enemy while shouting that it was strictly forbidden for master alchemists to fight to the death. She desperately yelled at Rihalzam that he would lose his qualifications in the best-case scenario and asked if something far more serious was driving his madness. Rihalzam merely groaned in agonizing pain as grotesque, fleshy tendrils violently burst from his clothing. The mutated executive sadistically declared that he had absolutely no intention of leaving any witnesses alive. Rust recoiled in alarm as countless glowing spores suddenly flooded the battlefield and rapidly sprouted into strange fungal growths. Covering his mouth to avoid inhaling the dangerous dust, Rust identified the creatures as slime mold-type transmuted beasts and realized he needed to create distance. The freshly spawned fungal creatures began to writhe and pull themselves straight out of the contaminated soil. Rust observed the bizarre phenomenon with a sharp gaze and noted that the mutated mushrooms had actually sprouted functional limbs. He deduced that Rihalzam had attached a poisonous element to the standalone transmuted beasts, concluding that while they looked weak individually, their massive numbers posed a serious threat. Facing down the endless, scurrying swarm of fungal monsters, Rust declared that he needed to wipe them all out in a single, devastating strike. With a swift and practiced motion, Rust snapped his fingers to instantly summon a specialized metallic scroll container into his waiting hand. Unfurling the weapon with unwavering resolve, he coldly apologized to the creatures and stated that he would have to completely dispose of them. He aggressively launched a brilliant magical array into the sky and commanded the powerful Polish spell to initiate. Watching the blinding light form, Kalen recognized the spell and wondered in awe if it was the exact same technique Rust used during the production of magic crystals. Rust targeted the floating Polish scroll and commanded the magical construct to unleash its absolute full power upon the battlefield. He screamed for the release limit to be removed as a colossal, roaring tornado of pure magical energy instantly obliterated the charging swarm. Rust aggressively thrust his hands forward and screamed for his magic to completely release its absolute limit. Channeling immense power into the swirling vortex before him, he quickly deduced that he needed to cut the mysterious transmuted beast into tiny pieces. With a devastating roar of wind, a colossal tornado erupted from Rust's spell and violently ripped across the barren wasteland toward the endless sea of creeping fungal monsters. The massive vortex violently sucked the sprawling swarm of mutated mushrooms directly into its crushing gravitational pull. Rust watched the destruction unfold while urgently noting that he needed to drag the dangerous swarm as far away from the campsite as possible. Ari casually remarked that the spell was turning the monsters into a pulverized mushroom smoothie as the intense suction power through the crushed remains everywhere. Sharp fragments of shattered debris violently whipped through the air and aggressively pelted the surrounding landscape. The towering cyclone utterly annihilated the contaminated area and left behind a massive trench of scoured earth in its destructive wake. Breathing a brief sigh of relief, Rust confidently lowered his hands and asked his companions if he managed to wipe out every single one of the creatures. As the blinding dust finally settled across the clearing, a massive and grotesque mountain of trembling slime ominously emerged from the center of the devastation. Staring at the terrifying entity, Kalen noted in pure that the attack happened incredibly fast and praised Master Rust for possessing such mercilessly strong power. Trembling at the overwhelming display of magical destruction, the cowardly executive muttered that he felt an intense urge to simply turn around and run away. Rihalzam's grotesque slime body violently squelched and sputtered as he desperately spat out a disgusting mixture of mud and foul fluids. Clutching his mutated form in absolute despair, he shrieked in absolute agony and demanded to know how Rust dared to brutally destroy all of his precious mushrooms. Rust and his companions visibly recoiled in sheer disgust as the deranged alchemist grunted and glared at them with a deeply unhinged expression. Dark pillars of corrupted magic suddenly erupted from the grotesque slime mass as a flurry of ominous incantations began flashing in the air around the ruined beast. Rust immediately snapped into action and questioned if the enemy was actually attempting to pull out a highly dangerous manifestation scroll. A thick and sinister miasma quickly began violently spewing out from the corrupted magical arrays surrounding Rihalzam's writhing body. Analyzing the rapidly descending smog, Rust quickly warned his team that it was not a simple smokescreen but a heavy gas designed to quickly fall and spread across the very ground they stood on. The disgusting mass suddenly detached itself from the corrupted core and cowardly slithered away into the distance in a desperate attempt to escape. As the group realized the villain was retreating, Kalen immediately shouted to chase after him while deeply questioning why the coward even bothered showing up in the first place. Ari frantically screamed for everyone to stop and warned that the lingering smoke covering their path might be highly lethal poison. Rust instantly commanded his magic to activate while gravely noting that despite the erratic and cowardly actions the fleeing man was still incredibly dangerous. Pulling out a specialized magical tool with fierce determination, Rust declared he was fully disengaging the seal to deal with a rogue master-ranked alchemist. Raising his hand toward the sky, he loudly commanded the ancient arrays to initiate a massive purification sequence. Brilliant hexagonal barriers instantly materialized around the toxic cloud to trap the dangerous magical particles within an absolute containment field. The stoic warrior loudly warned the others not to get close as she observed the distorted space and recalled that Rust had previously explained this exact spell was meant to forcefully separate complex gases. Staring intently at the swirling magical construct, Rust focused entirely on the delicate extraction process since maintaining such an advanced elemental separation required a massive amount of unyielding concentration. Rust carefully isolated a massive bubble of highly flammable pure oxygen from the toxic cloud and prepared to activate the next devastating phase of his counterattack. He masterfully projected a concentrated beam of raw sunlight directly into the volatile sphere to ignite the highly reactive atmosphere. The superheated oxygen detonated into a magnificent and explosive pillar of overwhelming thermal power that completely incinerated the sky. Rust quietly observed the smoldering aftermath and noted that the completely purified air now smelled perfectly safe to inhale. Safely approaching the lingering purple smoke with a specialized glass container, he calmly decided to collect the residual poison just to be incredibly thorough. Snapping the vial shut with a satisfied smirk, Rust firmly declared that the dangerous atmospheric cleanup was finally complete. Panic instantly erupted as Ari used her long-distance sight to frantically warn Master Rust about a massive threat approaching straight ahead from behind Kaylin's position right as she prepared to chase Rihalzam. A deafening roar shattered the horizon as an overwhelming swarm of terrifying new creatures rapidly descended upon the vulnerable camp. Rust quickly spun around in absolute shock as their horrific beasts broke through the clouds and revealed their menacing fangs. Staring at the bizarre mutation of winged armored salmon, Rust frustratingly questioned this horrible timing and realized the beasts were actively stampeding because they had suddenly evolved. A deep conflict instantly tore through Rust's mind as he desperately weighed whether he should chase after the escaping Rihalzam or stay behind to defend the innocent camp from total annihilation. Kaylin bravely stepped forward and commanded Ari and ROA to gauge the newly dubbed Sky Salmon's fighting power while she personally took charge of the battle and the rapid evacuation of all non-combat personnel. With unwavering resolve burning in her eyes, Kaylin fiercely ordered her entire team to prioritize staying alive above absolutely everything else. She then turned to her leader and fiercely shouted that she would respect whatever tactical decision he made as she urgently asked if he was truly going after Rihalzam. Rust gritted his teeth as an overwhelming sense of dread washed over him and his sharp instincts began loudly whispering dark warnings into his mind. He realized with sheer horror that choosing to go after the villain right now might actually be the exact catastrophic turning point of fate that Ari had previously prophesied. The crushing weight of leadership forced him to endlessly debate if he should chase his hated enemy into the deadly wilderness. He agonizingly looked back at his loyal friends and wondered if his true duty was to stand his ground and defend the helpless camp alongside everyone else. Rust closed his eyes in pure frustration and grimly realized that Kaylin and the other ground forces were incredibly disadvantaged against a swarm of rapid-flying enemies. Assessing the terrifying reality that his team lacked sufficient alchemy and magic items to pierce the hard scales of the sky attackers, he calculated that a completely defensive battle would inevitably result in a horrific amount of casualties. The dark premonition of his slaughtered friends violently flashed through his analytical mind and forced him to fully understand the deadly consequences of his impending choice. Accepting that letting the disgraced executive escape was a bitter necessity, Rust solemnly acknowledged that there was a very good reason why master-ranked alchemists were strictly forbidden from fighting each other to the death. Analyzing the devastating explosions, Rust solemnly acknowledged that the strict rules preventing alchemists from using their full power existed entirely to protect innocent people from catastrophic collateral damage. He seriously calculated that if he engaged the rogue executive without holding anything back, the massive collateral threat would rapidly escalate even higher. Staring at the stoic warrior, Rust realized that Kaylin completely understood these grim facts due to her heavy responsibilities as a feudal lord. He noted with deep respect that her absolute number one priority was to perfectly defend the vulnerable camp from annihilation. Despite her sworn duties, Rust fully understood that the noble warrior was unselfishly leaving the final agonizing choice entirely up to him. Steeling his resolve in the chaotic wasteland, Rust confidently stepped forward and firmly declared that he was staying behind to defend his friends. He emotionally confessed that observing Kaylin's unwavering dedication suddenly made me realize a crucial truth about leadership. Rust painfully deduced that if any casualties occurred because he selfishly chose to chase Rihalzam, Kaylin would forcefully bear that immense sadness and crushing regret entirely alone as the person in charge. He further recognized that her immense pride would force her to suffer in complete silence without ever letting anyone see her pain. Offering a reassuring smile to his allies, Rust calmly stated that they could easily deal with Rihalzam anytime the coward actually decided to come back. Kaylin closed her eyes and humbly accepted his decision before firmly commanding Master Rust to immediately prepare for the total extermination of the encroaching sky salmon swarm. Rust nervously sweated at the monumental task and weakly protested that completely exterminating the massive swarm was asking quite a lot from him. Ari desperately cried out for him to reconsider his choice right as Rust bravely vowed to do his absolute best to follow Kaylin's strict defensive orders. With frantic urgency, the panicked girl grabbed her head and loudly demanded that he chase Rihalzam instead to avoid a terrible fate. Kaylin violently interrupted the argument with an authoritative shout and fiercely ordered Ari to fulfill her duty since she was currently commanding the battlefield. Rust offered a solemn apology to the distressed girl while Kaylin ruthlessly pushed forward and confirmed they were heading straight into the brutal fight. He mentally reassured Ari that his current decision was not because he foolishly disbelieved the dark future she had clearly seen. Looking up at a distant memory of a quiet brick room, Rust regretfully recalled how he had become completely passive without even realizing it back in his old job. A flurry of warm memories flooded his mind as he remembered his loyal comrades promising their absolute trust and eagerly offering their unwavering support whenever he truly needed it. Lowering his head in silent reflection, he fully embraced the unbreakable bond he shared with his current allies and prepared to fight for their survival. Accompanied by the terrifying screeches of the approaching beasts, Rust sprinted toward the settlement and passionately vowed to protect all the irreplaceable things Kaylin and everyone else had given him. Shock suddenly rippled through the defenders as someone urgently pointed out that the massive sky salmon swarm had inexplicably broken into two distinct groups. A terrified observer quickly reported that while one group was rapidly descending toward the camp, the other was flying completely off toward the distant capital. Rust stared at the splitting swarm in deep confusion and nervously wondered if there was something specific in the capital attracting them or if they should simply consider the divided enemy forces as good news. Seeing the chaotic battle beginning to unfold, Rust urgently yelled out for ROA and Ari to check on their immediate status. The masked defenders confidently assured him they were perfectly fine since everyone possessed vital military knowledge right as Kaylin sprinted past and shouted for Master Rust to follow. Before plunging into the fray, Rust quickly demanded to know exactly where all the vulnerable non-combatants were currently located, prompting an immediate response that they were being securely locked inside the food storeroom. Offering a confident smile, Rust praised their brilliant tactical choice since an underground bunker was the most logical defense against an aggressive aerial assault. Stamping his heavy boot onto the cracked earth, he fiercely declared that he absolutely did not have a single second left to waste. Rust violently threw open the torn curtains of a makeshift laboratory tent and aggressively prepared to unleash his advanced alchemical techniques. Thrusting his hands toward his scattered supplies, he immediately initiated a rapid transmutation spell to frantically manipulate the surrounding magical potions. Glowing liquid spheres instantly began to float around the room as his raw magical power violently ripped the delicate ingredients from their physical containers. Focusing intensely on the swirling droplets, he commanded his spell to explicitly target the concentrated magic element solution and completely release its gravitational constraints. With absolute precision, the floating liquid rapidly condensed into exactly 9 perfectly forged magical spheres. Sweating heavily under the immense pressure, Rust frantically reminded himself that this was absolutely no time to be stingy with his incredibly rare and highest quality materials. He anxiously muttered that under normal circumstances he would never be so incredibly wasteful and would painstakingly try to stretch every single bit of the resources as far as possible. Glaring at the floating components with unyielding resolve, he forcefully rejected his frugal instincts and boldly told himself that he could simply create more of the highly precious items later. He firmly cemented his dangerous decision by declaring that sacrificing his best materials was a remarkably small price to pay if it meant successfully saving all the innocent people within the camp. Groaning as his trembling hands strained under the immense magical burden, Rust struggled to maintain several complex rapid transmutations simultaneously since the delicate process demanded focus equivalent to threading a microscopic needle. He mentally panicked as he realized he completely lacked the spare materials needed for a second attempt and fearfully knew that losing his focus now would render all of his desperate efforts completely useless. Suddenly, a horrific wave of exhaustion slammed into him and caused him to gasp in sheer terror as his vision blurred and his precious consciousness began to rapidly slip away. An ominous snapping sound echoed directly in his mind as the mental threads maintaining his delicate magical control began to violently break apart under the crushing strain. His eyes bulged in pure shock as the terrifying realization of his impending failure abruptly jolted his failing mind back into reality. Rust forcefully threw his body forward and released a desperate, agonized scream to forcibly physically shock himself out of the dangerous magical stupor. Panting heavily and trembling violently, he clutched his chest in the quiet tent as he fought desperately to regain his scattered breath. Wiping the cold sweat from his pale face, he noted that the terrifying near-collapse was far too close and nervously admitted his consciousness had entirely faded for a highly dangerous second. Quickly recovering his composure, he resumed forcefully merging the components to prepare the essential combat scrolls needed to obliterate the endless aerial enemies. As he masterfully combined the core monster skin and delicate magic circuits, he recalled that transmuting even a single magic stone normally required a tremendous amount of both time and raw materials. Despite the overwhelming odds and intense physical toll, Rust roared with newfound determination as he aggressively pushed his limits to simultaneously forge all 9 necessary weapons. A brilliant flash of light filled the tent as the 9 specialized scrolls successfully materialized in the air around him, prompting him to confidently declare the exhausting task finally complete. Glancing down at a severed piece of mystical thread, he warmly remembered Ari's heartfelt words explaining that the protective charm could be safely cut whenever absolutely necessary to grant a sudden burst of vital energy. Recognizing that his friend's thoughtful gift had literally just saved his life during his brief lapse in consciousness, Rust offered a deeply sincere and quiet thank you to the absent Ari. Armed with his newly forged arsenal and bursting with renewed energy, he sprinted out of the tent while desperately hoping that everyone outside had managed to survive the initial assault. Rust stared up in utter shock and questioned what was happening as an impossibly massive swarm of creatures gathered in the square. The terrifying swarm of fish-like monsters began their violent descent with a deafening roar. Rows of razor-sharp teeth flashed through the air as the grotesque flying creatures aggressively dove toward the ground. Observing his ally preparing for battle, Rust expressed genuine awe at the sheer imposing sight of Kaylin's jet-black full-plate armor. Watching her charge forward with explosive speed, he realized that her iconic gear was exactly where her famous nickname came from. He noted with deep respect that her overwhelming presence truly embodied the legendary war hero known to everyone as the jet-black Raging Bull. Rust quickly confirmed his thoughts and sweat dropped slightly as he watched her completely ignore tactics and just fiercely charge right into the fray. He analytically deduced that her secret weapon was pure mass since she already possessed many times the strength of a regular person while aggressively swatting the beasts away. Rust concluded that her heavy full-plate armor and massive sword perfectly existed to make up for whatever physical mass she personally lacked. After Kaylin aggressively shattered the ground and declared she was fully ready, Rust watched in sheer amazement. Acknowledging that she took almost no time to clear the area as fast as always, Rust enthusiastically shouted that she could actually handle this entirely on her own. Kaylin briefly paused her relentless assault and coldly replied that she did not think so while telling him to look closely. She seriously explained that simply smacking the beasts around would carelessly spread their eggs and inevitably cause much bigger trouble later. Turning her intense gaze back toward her leader, Kaylin firmly declared that she was counting entirely on Rust to finish the job cleanly. With a confident smirk playing across his face, Rust gripped his specialized weapon and promised he got the message and would take them all out in one go. Brilliant magical sparks filled the air as Rust aggressively initiated his sequence by commanding multiple floating scrolls to activate and begin the extermination. Throwing his arms wide under the cloudy sky, he furiously roared for even more scrolls to activate their hidden power. The masked onlookers stared in absolute bewilderment and wondered aloud if this blinding display was actually Master Rust's legendary alchemy. An authoritative voice suddenly commanded ROA and Ari to step back and take a little break while the magical storm brewed. Rust rapidly calculated his strategy while noting that using Polish scrolls to simply shred the enemies to pieces inside the camp would tragically cause a massive amount of collateral damage. Conversely, choosing a safer method, he deliberately triggered a manifestation scroll and summoned an enormous magical array from his waiting palm. A radiant and towering protective barrier instantly erected over the vulnerable camp as Rust called upon the power of Rose to intercept the plummeting swarm. The protective energy shield violently deflected the massive wave of aggressive sky salmon as they crashed against it. Suddenly, an overwhelming torrent of thick magical vines aggressively erupted from the glowing barrier and violently lashed out at the chaotic sky. The massive botanical construct completely obliterated the aerial threat and left behind a brilliantly clear sky as Rust triumphantly held his hands high. Their masked allies trembled with excitement and gasped in pure awe as one of them breathlessly praised the incredible feat. Rust warmly thanked Rose while enthusiastically explaining that he had used a return spell on parts of her to send them to another space before manifesting them again as a highly practical defense. He carefully examined the shattered beasts and deduced that their newly developed fins were strictly for maintaining flight balance while their hardened scales impressively housed magic elements. Poking the bizarre creature with a vine out of deep interest, he curiously wondered if they actively absorbed magic from the atmosphere just to generate dynamic lift. Gently petting his exhausted botanical companion, Rust sincerely apologized for the heavy burden and promised to prune her very carefully once the chaotic battle finally ended. Standing tall amidst the scattered debris, he adopted a fierce glare and firmly declared that it was finally time to completely exterminate the enemy. He aggressively pointed toward the heavens and commanded his floating scrolls to explosively disperse their devastating magical energy. Meanwhile, across the chaotic battlefield, a weary man named Littner stood his ground, since he sometimes served as a cook and was currently responsible for aggressively defending their vital food storeroom. With a ferocious battle cry, Littner violently swung his massive axe to desperately intercept the relentless attackers. Defending the camp's food storeroom shortly after the brutal attack began, Littner frantically shouted that there was absolutely no end to the endless monsters. A panicked subordinate urgently cried out for Commander Littner as the defensive line began to tragically buckle. A heavily scarred warrior bravely stepped forward and aggressively volunteered to act as living bait while charging directly into the enemy swarm. Littner immediately ordered the bold warrior not to break their vital circular formation and furiously reminded everyone that he was absolutely not a commander anymore. Violently striking down another beast with a powerful swing, Littner angrily yelled at his men to stay focused on the brutal fight. The exhausted defenders groaned that the beasts were incredibly hard and desperately asked their reluctant commander what to do, since they were rapidly being pushed back. Littner paused his frantic assault and carefully weighed their grim options with a deeply troubled expression. He firmly reminded his panicking troops about Lady Kaelin's strict message to simply bear with the situation and stubbornly insisted that all they could do was completely trust her. Looking back with unyielding resolve, he passionately declared that they had already gotten this far by trusting her and must continue to bravely hold the line. Raising his bloody weapon high into the air, Littner fiercely commanded everyone to listen up and desperately keep at it. Sweating heavily under the intense pressure, Littner privately cursed that they really should start looking for the right time to retreat, while silently begging Lady Kaelin to hurry right as a panicked soldier interrupted him. Littner tiredly repeated that he was not their commander before suddenly freezing in complete shock at a terrifying new sight. A massive tangle of writhing vines violently erupted from the ground and prompted Littner to fearfully question if an entirely new monster had just joined the fray. The horrifying botanical entity aggressively wrapped entirely around a struggling sky salmon and led the shocked men to wonder if it was actually eating the beast. Absolute panic instantly shattered the defensive line as the terrified soldiers screamed that the enemy swarm had completely broken through. Littner angrily cursed his miserable luck as an overwhelming wave of sharp-finned monsters rapidly descended straight toward their vulnerable heads. Sprinting forward with his heavy axe raised, Littner furiously ordered his terrified men not to falter because the lethal enemies were already upon them. The horrific jaws of the mutated fish snapped violently open as Littner grimly braced himself and wondered if this was truly the end. Suddenly, a blinding flurry of razor-sharp magical attacks violently ripped across the chaotic battlefield and instantly intercepted the deadly swarm. The stunned defenders stared in pure disbelief at the swirling botanical destruction and slowly realized that the saving vines were actually pouring out of Master Rust's advanced alchemical scrolls. Trembling with residual fear, the men breathlessly noted that all the sky salmon were completely ripped apart in a single second, even though their commander's heavy axe previously failed to scratch them. Littner lowered his useless weapon and stared blankly at the pulverized monster remains while seriously questioning what kind of absurd power he had just witnessed. The exhausted soldiers realized they had been struggling desperately and fearfully concluded that master-rank alchemists were truly terrifying monsters. Wiping the cold sweat from his forehead, Littner nervously chuckled that the carefree-looking Rust used incredibly gruesome techniques before casually asking the bold warrior for a status update on his little brother. The warrior quickly confirmed there were 0 casualties and only 12 minor injuries consisting mostly of scratches and blows after Littner formally requested a damage report. A genuine smile of profound relief finally broke across Littner's exhausted face as he warmly replied that the survival of his men was incredibly good to hear. The scarred warrior suddenly questioned how many times he had to point out their irrelevance by bluntly stating that Rust's magic was pretty much a perfect defense. Crossing his massive arms in bitter defeat, the bold warrior grumbled that the infantry really were not needed at all during this completely one-sided battle. Littner stared at the massive man in pure disbelief and immediately branded him an absolute idiot. Littner harshly scolded him by explaining there would have been serious damage if the swarm broke through right away or if the infantry had not successfully evacuated the vulnerable non-combatants beforehand. He disappointedly lectured the giant for foolishly becoming depressed over his own perceived weakness simply because he witnessed a much greater power. Playfully punching the hulking warrior in the shoulder, Littner enthusiastically reminded him that survival relied entirely on sharing responsibilities and putting the right people in the exact right roles. Their heartfelt moment was suddenly shattered as someone frantically yelled that the mules were being attacked, and Littner horrifically realized this perfect defense would instantly collapse if even one vital person went missing. Thrusting his fist into the air with renewed fiery determination, Littner fiercely commanded 2 men to follow him so they could violently mop up the dangerous stragglers and proudly protect their perfect defense. The bold warrior offered a deeply respectful smile and quietly noted that Litna truly was their one and only true commander as the brave man charged back into the fray. A cheerful red-haired girl confidently led her companions forward as she cheerfully thought about what she truly wanted to protect. Meanwhile, a completely exhausted man named Rihalzam dragged his broken body across the dirt while groaning in pure agonizing pain. Sweat poured down his deeply wrinkled face as he desperately asked the heavens why such a terrible fate had befallen him. Panting heavily in the dense woods, Rihalzam desperately wondered how his once perfect life had devolved into such a miserable nightmare. Taking a shaky breath to steady his racing heart, he angrily realized that there was exactly one root cause for all of his current suffering. He firmly declared that his perfect career all went horribly wrong the exact moment that arrogant young man first came to the association. He bitterly remembered how a young and ambitious Rust had earnestly declared his lifelong interest in alchemy and his deep desire to do basic research on magic elements. Recalling the young man's incredibly passionate speech, Rihalzam sneered with utter contempt and declared that absolutely everything about that guy was totally nasty. He then remembered a traumatic childhood moment where a little girl cried out to her mother in pure shock after discovering sudden mushroom growths right where nothing had existed yesterday. The terrified mother recoiled in absolute disgust while fearfully wondering if the primitive fungi were somehow related to dark alchemy. A desperate figure immediately ordered everyone to get rid of the gross fungi before the dangerous contamination could violently spread any further. Returning to his painful memories, a young Rihalzam was strictly told by his parents to forget the foolish distraction and diligently focus entirely on studying his alchemy today. He sorrowfully recalled how his brilliant parents had massive hopes for him to join their prestigious field and how he was originally destined to become the youngest master rank ever. His heart completely shattered when the association entirely ignored his own promotion to head of the arms department and instead praised the young genius Rust as the youngest master rank in history. Dragging his horrific mutated body across the unforgiving dirt, the disgraced executive swore he would get a brutal revenge on Rust and absolutely everyone who surrounded him. Rihalzam furiously ranted that Rust was acting all high and mighty just because of a little talent before promising to humiliate him and forcefully make him taste true despair. His vengeful monologue abruptly stopped as he stared down at his chest in absolute horror and questioned what the massive bleeding wound was. Clutching his mangled body in sheer panic, he cursed loudly and desperately wondered why his condition was rapidly deteriorating. Panic entirely consumed his mind as he forcefully chugged a healing potion while screaming to know why the magical liquid was completely failing to work. In an act of absolute desperation, he angrily promised to drink absolutely every single potion he possessed while screaming that it simply had to be enough. Throwing the empty bottles aside, Rihalzam weakly muttered that the medicine was not doing anything at all and fearfully asked himself what he should do about this incredibly weird situation. Refusing to simply die in the woods, he convinced himself that returning to their main association building would surely give him access to the extremely high-quality potions he desperately needed. Steeling his wavering resolve, the desperate man firmly declared his new plan and aggressively pulled out a specialized magical tool. He bitterly complained that he never wanted to use this specific magic because it would get his clothes dirty before concluding that such trivial matters absolutely did not matter anymore. Thrusting his hand toward a glowing magical portal, Rihalzam commanded the parasitic Myzomycete King transmuted beast to violently creep onto his flesh and initiate an interdimensional connection. The powerful magical array violently expanded and forcefully enveloped the disgraced alchemist in a brilliant flash of transformative light. A massive surge of dark energy crackled violently through the air as his broken body entirely surrendered to the dangerous spatial spell. Safely encased within a levitating dark orb, the heavily injured man urgently commanded the magical spell to immediately transport him straight to the capital. The dark magical sphere forcefully launched itself through the dense forest and violently shattered the surrounding branches as it rapidly shot toward the horizon. Far off in the distance, the grand and sprawling architecture of the capital city peacefully rested beneath the bright afternoon sky. The dark orb violently crashed onto a paved city street as Rihalzam frantically commanded his magical transportation to stop right outside the grand gates. The magical barrier immediately dissolved into thin air as the exhausted executive aggressively commanded the spell to fully return. Struggling to stay standing on the cobblestone street, he urgently reminded himself that he desperately needed to get a powerful potion right now. Slowly dragging his feet forward, Rihalzam nervously worried that a city guard would normally stop him for looking so incredibly suspicious in his current broken state. He stumbled entirely unnoticed into a completely ruined city square where injured civilians aimlessly wandered through the horrific destruction. The traumatized citizens desperately yelled for a relief squad while frantically questioning how mysterious flying fish completely overwhelmed the mighty army by effortlessly bouncing off all their weapons. Rihalzam heavily panted through his intense pain while a sudden and terrifying chill violently crept down his spine as he looked closely at the surrounding damage. Trying to entirely ignore the screaming civilians, he stubbornly focused on his goal and promised himself he would safely reach the Alchemist Association the exact moment he turned the final corner. He finally rounded the corner only to discover that the once majestic and towering Alchemist Association building had been completely reduced to a hollowed pile of shattered stone. The completely bewildered executive stared blankly at the massive ruins and nervously asked himself if he had somehow made a wrong turn. His eyes went wide with absolute shock as he recognized the remaining entrance doors and realized this gigantic pile of rubble was actually the proud association. Clutching his bleeding face in sheer disbelief, Rihalzam screamed that there was absolutely no way the job he dedicated his entire life to was suddenly gone forever. A deeply sinister and incredibly mocking voice suddenly echoed from the shadows and casually greeted the completely devastated Master Rihalzam. Rihalzam quickly spun around in pure shock and questioned the sudden intrusion as the mysterious stranger calmly noted the presence of a barrier that specifically cleared people away. The strange figure closely examined the trembling alchemist and noted with dark amusement that the horrifying fungal infection had already encroached quite a bit into his body. Turning their attention to the completely ruined building, the mysterious speaker casually verified that the massive pile of rubble used to be the Grand Alchemist Association. The dark figure enthusiastically celebrated the absolute spectacle of the attack and praised the massive swarm of armored salmon for violently descending straight from the sky. The stranger happily deduced that the beasts aggressively targeted the building entirely because someone deliberately left something they desperately liked deeply inside the association. Gloating over the massive destruction, the villain noted that most other places only suffered moderate damage before bitterly complaining about an annoying swordswoman who temporarily delayed the wonderful attack. A deeply wicked smile stretched across the stranger's shadowed face as they dramatically shrugged their shoulders and sarcastically called the entire situation a massive shame. Trembling with an intense mixture of pain and fear, Rihalzam desperately stared at the cloaked stranger and weakly asked who they actually were. The villain flashed a terrifying grin and deceitfully claimed to be just a trivial and completely unimportant man who simply came to deliver a message. Stepping closer to the terrified executive, the stranger mockingly bowed and stated that they really needed to personally thank Master Rihalzam. The stranger aggressively presented a glowing metallic object and thanked the disgraced executive specifically for shipping out those highly defective magic circuits. Rihalzam instantly broke into a massive cold sweat as the angry stranger firmly declared that his grand plan was entirely ruined thanks to those exact broken circuits. Without a single moment of hesitation, the cloaked villain violently grabbed Rihalzam by the face and forcefully slammed him backwards. The mysterious figure effortlessly lifted the struggling alchemist completely off the ground and tightly squeezed his bleeding face with terrifying strength. The villain closely inspected the squirming victim and suddenly stopped the brutal assault upon realizing they had just found something absolutely marvelous. Staring intensely at the disgusting fungal infection spreading across Rihalzam's arm, the villain happily declared that the man's outstanding magic affinity and massive negative emotions were perfectly growing the demon inside him. The stranger released a dark chuckle and promised to give the suffering Master Rihalzam a truly great present as a simple token of gratitude. A horrifying surge of dark energy violently erupted from Rihalzam's infected arm as the brutal magical mutation forcibly engaged. Watching the agonizing transformation unfold, the villain cheerfully promised the screaming man that a wonderful new life awaited him and declared immense gladness over choosing to stay behind. The cloaked figure casually wished the mutating man a very happy demon life and quickly excused himself before that annoying swordswoman could finally arrive. Rihalzam collapsed onto the ruined street and confusingly realized that the intense agonizing pain in his right leg was completely disappearing. A small group of bruised civilians quickly rushed over to the fallen man and desperately asked if he was all right after surviving the horrific destruction. The concerned citizens suddenly recoiled in absolute horror as the man violently rolled over to reveal a massive cluster of pulsating mushrooms bursting straight out of his face. The grotesque fungal beast violently snapped its jaws open and released a terrifyingly loud roar into the ruined city street. The paralyzed civilians stared at the mutated abomination in sheer disbelief and frantically screamed about the massive mushrooms growing from its body. The horrific monster violently thrashed across the shattered cobblestone and completely shattered the peaceful silence with its agonized groans. The once proud executive had been entirely consumed by his own dark magic and was now completely reborn as the terrifying demon Rihalzam. The panicking survivors immediately realized this human-shaped demon was the true monster entirely responsible for causing the devastating armored salmon attack from the sky. Absolute chaos completely engulfed the ruined square as the terrified citizens frantically ordered everyone to run away from the deadly demon. Desperate cries echoed through the streets urging someone to quickly call the army or the knights to come kill the monster before it could slaughter the wounded apprentices. The confused fungal monster stood completely still as its fleshy cap violently popped and expanded while its fractured human mind desperately wondered why everyone was looking at him with such intense fear. The beast suddenly unleashed a massive cloud of toxic spores into the air and caused the panicked crowd to violently push each other while screaming to run from the deadly poison. Trapped deep within the horrific mutated shell, the fading human consciousness of Rihalzam weakly reached out and desperately begged the fleeing people to simply wait. A sudden flurry of sharp arrows violently pierced the monster's fungal back and forcefully interrupted its terrifying advance. The towering beast slowly turned its mutated head around and discovered a heavily armed squad of city guards fiercely blocking its only path of escape. A completely resolute young commander firmly raised his hand and forcefully ordered his entire squad to ready their weapons and fire at the deadly abomination all at once. The soldiers took aim at the massive threat looming in the destroyed city street. They kept their weapons trained steadily at the hideous demon. The monstrous entity roared as it aggressively unleashed dark magic across the ruined square. A soldier ordered his men to stop firing their magic guns as he confirmed the horrific beast was indeed a demon, just like the report stated. He grimly noted that there was absolutely no doubt about it, since their magic element bullets were completely ineffective. The stressed soldiers sweated over being incredibly short-staffed while suddenly facing something this unimaginably big. A subordinate anxiously asked Acting Captain Harold if they should charge in, despite the reports explicitly stating the demon spores were highly poisonous. Harold decisively commanded his men to equip their elemental changing magic circuits and fire everything in one massive volley. The grotesque demon struggled to form words through its mutated face as it weakly muttered fragmented human sounds. Before the monster could finish its sentence, the merciless captain loudly ordered his squad to fire. A massive barrage of elemental fire violently engulfed the screaming demon as it flailed in sheer burning agony. The captain aggressively threw his hand up to stop the assault after realizing the demon was rapidly gaining a powerful resistance to their flames. Drawing their swords with unyielding resolve, the brave squad furiously charged straight toward the towering abomination. The desperate demon violently crashed through the stone street and forcefully shattered the heavy grate below to make a frantic escape. Harold cursed loudly as the cowardly beast successfully slipped away into the dark and damp city gutters. Meanwhile, far away from the chaotic capital, the peaceful sky over the frontier camp signaled a hard-won victory. Standing before her gathered people, Kaelin formally presented the damage estimates and the expected massive profits from their newly acquired magic stones while offering special bonuses to those who performed exceptionally well. She turned her proud gaze toward the masked observers and warmly called out for Roa and Ari. Kaelin sincerely praised the duo for successfully executing their dangerous duty of spreading information quickly and accurately gauging the Sky Salmon's combat power during the brutal attack. Shifting her attention, she gently called upon the weary former Commander Littner. She expressed her deep gratitude by highlighting how he fought arduously to protect the non-combatants and ensured that absolutely none of them were harmed. Kaelin confidently declared her complete trust in his commanding abilities to firmly manage the camp's incredibly hot-blooded members who always wanted to rush ahead blindly. Littner humbly bowed his head and expressed immense gratitude for the kind words despite being supposedly retired from active military duty. Rust offered a gentle and supportive smile as Kaelin finally turned her attention entirely toward him. She passionately commended him for his truly great achievement of rapidly exterminating the entire Sky Salmon swarm without causing any additional collateral damage to their vulnerable camp. With profound emotion in her voice, she confessed that she completely lacked the words to properly thank him, since one wrong move would have entirely ruined their grand operation to develop the land. Flashing a brilliant and heartfelt smile, Kaelin cheerfully declared how truly glad she was that Rust had decided to join their little frontier family. Deeply touched by her sincere praise, Rust softly thanked her while humbly accepting the massive compliment. The entire camp erupted into a joyous wave of applause as everyone warmly celebrated their miraculous survival together. Standing amidst the cheerful crowd, Rust quietly reflected on the overwhelming warmth surrounding him at this exact moment. He peacefully realized that all the bitter regrets and bad feelings he secretly harbored over letting Rihalzam escape were finally melting away from his heavy heart. Kaelin closed her eyes and smiled softly as she basked in the triumphant atmosphere of her united people. She then announced to the crowd that she had officially issued a formal complaint with the Alchemist Association regarding Master Rihalzam's completely unprovoked attack against Master Rust. Bringing up the grim reality, she solemnly reminded everyone that the chaotic swarm of Sky Salmon had also heavily attacked the distant capital city. Rust quietly noted that while he had absolutely no intention of ever returning to his old haunt, he simply could not remain indifferent to the horrific damage the association suffered. Given the massive chaos currently engulfing the royal castle, Rust boldly suggested that they should completely stop waiting around for official instructions. He passionately declared that they needed to aggressively seize this rare opportunity to press forward and instantly distribute all of their magic crystals across the market. Kaelin smirked confidently and agreed with his ambitious plan while playfully noting that the massive endeavor meant a ton of extra work entirely for him. She excitedly announced that the next vital shipment of Kajero fruit was fully scheduled to safely arrive within just a few days. Kaylin firmly added that they would also immediately prioritize the rapid construction of the new road to secure their prosperous future. With the neighboring lord fiercely supporting their cause, she loudly rallied her people and passionately asked for everyone's continued unwavering support. The inspired villagers cheered enthusiastically as Kaylin stood proudly alongside her fiercely loyal commanders and dearest friends. Retreating from the overwhelming attention, a heavily exhausted Rust finally slipped back into the quiet sanctuary of his personal tent. His tired expression instantly vanished as pure shock violently seized him and forced his eyes wide open in sheer disbelief. Resting peacefully upon a soft pillow amidst a tangle of magical vines was the tiny transmuted lizard he had saved earlier. The little creature happily chirped at him with a remarkably energetic and entirely innocent gaze. Rust knelt down in utter bewilderment and curiously asked the little beast if it had actually just shed its skin. Carefully inspecting its back, he stared in pure awe at the brand new set of delicate wings sprouting from its small body. The incredible realization violently hit him as he loudly questioned if the little creature was actually a legendary dragon instead of a mere lizard. Sweating nervously, Rust quietly admitted to himself that he had absolutely never seen a real dragon before in his entire life. Staring intensely at the tiny creature, he completely failed to understand why a baby dragon would have ever been stranded out in that specific wasteland. The little dragon let out a soft growl and prompted a bewildered Rust to desperately wonder exactly what he was supposed to do with it now. Assuming it was hungry, he quickly offered the tiny beast a heavily compressed grass brick from his supplies. The little dragon aggressively sneezed at the dull brick and completely rejected the unappetizing offering. Rust broke a small piece off and earnestly tried to convince the stubborn creature that the brick was actually edible food. Holding the dry fragment closer, he gently urged the tiny beast to just take a small bite. The dragon stubbornly turned its head away and squeaked in absolute refusal, making Rust deduce that such a majestic creature naturally craved real meat. Desperately searching his makeshift laboratory, he decided to use some highly specialized liquid materials he had originally saved for complex monster transmutations. He carefully grabbed an advanced magical potion while nervously hoping a very small amount would be completely safe for the baby dragon to consume. Thanking his botanical companion Rose for keeping watch, he gently poured the shimmering liquid into a shallow metal bowl. The high-quality magical potion radiated a brilliant and alluring glow as it settled perfectly into the feeding dish. To his absolute shock, the tiny dragon aggressively guzzled down the entire bowl in seconds and eagerly begged for more even though most living beings instinctively hated that specific magical taste. Rust seriously instructed Rose to keep a close eye on the creature before rapidly activating a complex transcribed scroll to carefully monitor the dragon's physical condition just in case. Scrutinizing the floating geometric data, he muttered in deep confusion over the highly unusual alchemical readings. He breathed a sigh of immense relief after confirming that the intense magical potion caused absolutely no negative side effects to the little beast's tiny body. The satisfied baby dragon let out a tiny burp and relaxed comfortably within its protective nest of vines. Staring fondly at the incredible creature, Rust gently mused that he really needed to give his new companion a proper name. Later at the bustling camp dining table, Rust casually explained the entire bizarre situation to Kaylin while she continued to happily stuff her face with food. A nearby villager eagerly noted that if it truly was a dragon, it would be the first time in centuries someone had seen one since they were considered completely legendary creatures. Rust admitted it was highly likely to be a dragon since he had sensed its remarkable intelligence even back when he initially saved it in the wasteland. Kaylin ruthlessly chewed her fancy sky salmon canape and bluntly pointed out that simply rejecting a terrible-tasting grass brick was absolutely not solid proof of high intelligence. Ignoring her sharp critique, Rust stubbornly insisted on investigating its intelligence further while casually snacking on the exact same dry grass bricks that everyone else absolutely hated. Offering a deeply knowing smile, Kaylin softly told Rust that she completely understood his true intentions because she knew exactly what kind of person he was. Rust smiled back gently and admitted that while he originally thought about simply releasing the creature back into the wild, its true nature changed absolutely everything. With a determined glint in his eye, he firmly declared that since it really was a legendary dragon, he should definitely be able to form a powerful magical contract with it. Staring at the peculiar item on the table and questioning the reality of the situation, Kaylin asks if forming a contract isn't just something straight out of a hundreds of years old fairy tale. With a knowing sigh, the young man realizes this will be a long explanation and clarifies that ancient folk tales are usually 90% false and only 10% true. Stealing her resolve, Kaylin grants him her full permission to proceed with Rose while promising to take every necessary precaution beforehand. Her strict demeanor suddenly softens into genuine gratitude as she enthusiastically thanks him for his incredible efforts. Leaning in with a playful wink, Rose cheerfully declares that she absolutely wants to be present for the magical event as well. Looking slightly overwhelmed but entirely compliant, the young alchemist nods and states that he completely understands the situation. Shifting back to strict business, Kalen firmly instructs him to call for her the moment he is finally ready to begin. When he skeptically asks if she just wants to watch for her own amusement, Kalen breaks into a mischievous laugh and shamelessly admits that is exactly the reason. Left alone with his swirling thoughts and his extensive alchemical setup, the young man exhales a deep breath and prepares to start. Puzzled by their sudden and unexpected appearance, Rose gestures toward the heavily cloaked duo and openly asks why ROA and Ari have returned. Peering intensely through her glasses, ROA defensively declares that she is standing guard while the tiny creature chirps nervously under her harsh gaze. Observing this tense standoff, Rose wonders if ROA simply harbors a deep hatred for lizards since she had been extremely wary from the exact moment she first laid eyes on the creature. Sensing the rapidly escalating tension in the room, Rust gently orders ROA to stand down because there shouldn't be any real problem. Her intense and offensive demeanor instantly vanishing, ROA respectfully apologizes to Master Rust for her severely overprotective behavior. Closely observing her face, Rust notes that her magical future sight isn't activating since he cannot detect the usual shine of magic elements in her eyes. Relying heavily on this complete lack of magical activation, Rust confidently deduces that a violent confrontation with the white dragon is highly unlikely to happen. Despite his logically confident deduction, Rust takes a highly cautious approach and firmly requests that ROA and Ari stay safely behind Hippopo just in case things go wrong. When an indignant Rose questions why she wasn't told to hide alongside the others, Rust smoothly placates her by pointing out that she is the toughest one present, which earns him a proud laugh of agreement. Changing the subject back to the impending and dangerous task, Ari curiously asks Master Rust how exactly one goes about forming a contract using alchemy. Rust carefully explains that standard and half-hearted alchemy would merely bounce off a true dragon's scales, while anything significantly stronger would inevitably end up hurting the precious creature. Intrigued by this seemingly impossible alchemical dilemma, Ari leans in and eagerly asks how he actually plans to pull this off. Instead of giving a simple and direct answer, Rust responds with a profound question regarding their personal knowledge of ancient primordial magic. Adjusting her glasses thoughtfully, ROA admits her knowledge is extremely limited to the basic facts that primordial magic revolves entirely around life and heavily uses blood as a vital intermediary. Rust enthusiastically reveals that primordial magic is essentially dragon magic itself and that he is currently relying on the extensive theories of a former senior who intensely researched those ancient dragon-human legends. Just as he is about to excitedly launch into a massive academic lore dump, a sudden shout orders him to stop immediately. Stepping in as the strict voice of reason, ROA sharply commands Rust to cease his endless rambling while simultaneously scolding Ari for needlessly encouraging his massive academic tangents. Awkwardly cutting his passionate lecture short, Rust sheepishly apologizes while a slightly overwhelmed Ari stammers out her thanks for the surprisingly interesting explanation. Regaining his professional composure with a deliberate clearing of his throat, Rust officially calls upon Rose to help him begin the perilous procedure. Standing confidently before the intricate alchemical barrier, Rust extends an open and welcoming hand toward the tiny mythical creature resting peacefully among the vines. Keeping his movements incredibly slow and deliberate, Rust reminds everyone watching that the creature sitting in front of him is still a genuine dragon despite its deceptively young appearance. Sweating slightly from the immense physical pressure, Rust admits his deep nervousness by calculating that the beast could easily rip off his arm if Rose fails to intercept a sudden attack in time. Watching nervously from the distant sidelines, Kalen whispers a frantic question about whether he is actually using an incredibly expensive potion as bait before being quickly shushed by her companion. Completely ignoring the incredibly tense humans surrounding it, the tiny dragon eagerly laps up the mysterious liquid from the shallow dish. Watching the creature happily drink, Rust silently regrets not bringing his concentrated magic element solutions since they are absolutely essential for crafting high-quality potions despite being a total pain to synthesize. His mind briefly drifting away from the dangerous task at hand, Rust suddenly wonders what exactly happened to the valuable solutions he recklessly left behind at the Alchemist Association. Offering a silent and desperately hopeful prayer, the young alchemist wishes that his volatile creations are safely stored away from prying hands. Returning his intense focus to the mythological reality standing right before him, Rust recalls from ancient legends that forming a true contract relies heavily upon the dragon's own innate primordial magic. Reaching the absolute climax of his meticulous preparation, Rust suddenly draws a beautifully ornate dagger as the tension in the room rapidly skyrockets. Shocked by the sudden and terrifying appearance of a weapon, an anxious voice desperately asks Master Rust to explain exactly what he is currently holding. Turning back with a calm and highly reassuring smile, Rust happily explains that the terrifying weapon is actually just a very special knife carved perfectly from a twin linehorn's horn. According to ancient legends and fairy tales, the contract ritual officially begins with a blood offering from the human. Recognizing the necessary trigger for the ritual to commence, he prepares to initiate the next step. He slowly draws out this specific knife to perform the crucial bloodletting. Rust utilizes capillary action to flow his blood from the blade's tip into its carved pattern and creates a blood crest using the least amount of blood possible. He firmly declares that his name is Rust as the magical ritual begins to take hold. Channeling his energy through the intricate pattern of his blood, he proudly proclaims himself as an alchemist to the tiny dragon. With the glowing blood crest fully activated, he formally announces his intention to seek and form a binding contract. Suddenly, brilliant magical circles manifest in the air between the young alchemist and the mesmerized creature. Shocked by the bizarre holographic text floating before him, Rust gasps in absolute confusion while realizing this unprecedented phenomenon is a complete first for him. Staring at the floating symbols, he wonders if it is some ancient language and deeply feels that the strange characters must mean something important. Snapping him out of his intense focus, Rose suddenly calls out his name and asks if there is something hovering over there. Astounded by her oblivious question, he turns back and asks in disbelief if the three of them genuinely cannot see the glowing script. Seeking further confirmation from the others, he quickly asks Ari and ROA if they can spot anything unusual in the air. Realizing the truth as ROA and Ari confirm they see absolutely nothing, Rust quietly accepts their completely blind perspective. Admitting his own ignorance about the strange anomaly, Rust explains to Rose that a bizarre polygonal plate is floating directly in front of him. Warning her just in case things go wrong, he quickly tells Rose that he will not need any immediate physical assistance right now. Concluding that he is the only one who can perceive these unusual shapes, he deduces they look like alchemy rings but are likely something entirely different. Driven by overwhelming curiosity, Rust cautiously reaches out his hand to physically interact with the mysterious glowing symbols hovering in midair. To his absolute shock, a powerful burst of energy violently repels his hand the moment his fingers graze the magical interface. Recoiling swiftly from the unexpected kinetic feedback, he completely reassesses the highly volatile nature of the ancient magic hovering before him. Meanwhile, the little white dragon lets out an adorable chirp as it curiously watches the human struggle with the invisible barrier. Noticing the dragon's encouraging gaze, Rust incredulously asks the creature if it seriously wants him to try touching the volatile rings again. Watching him interact with thin air, a highly confused Ari whispers a question about whether Master Rust is actually touching something invisible. Activating her special ocular abilities, ROA squints hard and frustratedly reports that her magic eyes cannot detect a single trace of energy. Realizing her eyes can pierce through standard obstructing techniques, ROA quietly wonders if they are currently witnessing the legendary and elusive primordial magic. Rust carefully pushes his finger against the interface while deeply analyzing this completely unknown graphic and entirely unprecedented magical phenomenon. Realizing he cannot be careless, he cautiously wonders what the letter-like symbols mean and if touching different areas will trigger completely different magical reactions. Although he knows the immense danger pushing against him, his insatiable researcher nature forcefully compels him to keep experimenting. Sweating with intense focus, he notes the changing regularity of the alien numbers and wonders what will happen if he keeps manipulating the shifting letters. Glancing down at his tiny companion, Rust suddenly deduces that the little white dragon hovering right in front of him can perfectly understand the alien script. Shockingly, a brilliant light begins to emanate directly from his bleeding wound as the mystical connection deepens between human and beast. The intricate alchemical pendant hanging from his neck erupts with blinding radiance as the primordial contract reaches its absolute climax. Sensing a sudden surge of overwhelming magical energy, Rust frantically screams for Rose as the spell fully unleashes its power. A loud scream echoes through the room as the sheer force of the magical shockwave completely blinds everyone present. As the blinding light finally begins to fade away, Rust lets out a breathless gasp of pure astonishment at the impossible sight before him. Uttering a soft chirp, the formerly tiny creature sits majestically amidst the fading sparkles of the completed ritual. Staring in absolute disbelief at the drastically transformed beast, Rust mutters aloud and asks how the dragon got so much bigger. Rendered entirely speechless by the magnificent evolution, he simply stares into the creature's glowing eyes as a profound magical bond settles into his soul. Smiling warmly at his new companion, Rust decides the beast needs a name and thoughtfully combines the concepts of sacredness and running through the skies. Proudly naming the majestic dragon Sealuk, the exhausted alchemist successfully finalizes the legendary contract and perfectly solidifies their eternal bond. Late at night within the quiet camp, a profound stillness settled over the area. Breaking the silence, a voice called out to Rust and announced their sudden entry. Surprised by Kaylin's unexpected nighttime visit, Rust questioned her motives, though she quickly brushed it off as nothing important. Holding up a bottle of Matuasargi liquor with a mischievous grin, she declared that it had simply been too long since they last shared a drink together. Clinking the glass softly, she amusedly noted his meticulous nature as she casually borrowed his clean alchemical beakers to use as drinking glasses. Rust launched into a rapid-fire lecture about how even a single speck of dust could ruin a delicate transmutation, which prompted Kalen to smirk at his unavoidable scientific rant. Telling him not to worry, she proudly revealed that she had snuck out some delicious meat and fish snacks without Littner even noticing. Impressed that he came so well prepared, Kalen watched as Rust firmly requested Rose to create a small and private dining room for them. As the shimmering liquor was poured into the glass beakers, the little dragon emitted a curious chirp while observing the relaxing humans. After the tiny creature let out an adorable sneeze, Kalen offered it a drink while noting that Rust was allowing his new companion to roam completely free. The mystical beast cheerfully flapped its wings and comfortably settled onto the young alchemist's shoulder as the relaxed evening continued. Observing the adorable interaction, Kalen warmly commented on how nice it was that the majestic dragon chose to perch right on his shoulder. Raising her makeshift glass for a cheerful toast, Kalen playfully teased Rust about how most of his carefully brewed potions usually ended up tasting like terrible grass anyway. They happily clinked their glass beakers together and dedicated their warm toast to the wonderful experience of meeting someone entirely new. Smiling softly at the sentiment, Rust agreed with her toast and raised his glass to the promising future of a brand new friendship. Gazing at his friend, Rust silently reflected on how incredibly thankful he was to Kalen because he never would have ended up here without her initial invitation. He deeply wondered if he would have inevitably quit and walked a completely different path, or if he would currently be wasting away back at the rigid Alchemist Association. Filled with immense gratitude, he realized that it was entirely thanks to her kindness that he had successfully met everyone in this wonderful new place. Suddenly coughing wildly after taking a harsh sip, Rust stared at the potent liquor in absolute shock while Kalen laughed at his dramatic reaction. Kalen gleefully explained that the ridiculously strong liquor was famously called fire spirit because it could supposedly set absolutely anything ablaze. Deciding to take a much safer approach to the fiery beverage, Rust thanked Rose as he wisely chose to cut the intense liquor with fresh water. Regaining his composure after the fiery drink, Rust looked directly at her and asked what she actually wanted to talk about tonight. Knowing her true nature, Rust correctly deduced she had a hidden motive just before she brought up the massive road construction project they had previously discussed. Kalen proudly announced that they were finally moving ahead with the plans and directly asked for his valuable alchemical assistance in the coming days. Downing the rest of her drink with a satisfied sigh, she cheerfully declared that was all she needed and promised she would be heavily counting on him again. Watching her laugh boisterously under the night sky, Rust silently marveled at the staggering amount of potent alcohol the young feudal lord could easily consume. Recognizing that she was usually very easygoing despite her heavy burdens, Rust gladly accepted her invitation to drink up and enjoy the fleeting night. Realizing how many massive responsibilities weighed heavily upon her as a feudal lord, Rust offered her more food while she playfully demanded to form a magical contract with him too. Staring softly into the starlit sky above their camp, the young alchemist happily resolved to keep her comforting company because that was exactly what true friends were for. The peaceful night quickly faded into a bright morning where an utterly frustrated Rust shouted out that he simply could not understand the magical phenomenon at all. Staring intently at the glowing magical plate, Rust analyzed how the strange numbers shifted during the contract even though he felt absolutely no physical changes in his own body. He carefully reviewed his alchemical tools and noted that while a transcribed scroll could read physical body data, his special pendulum was strictly required for non-physical magical elements. Piling up endless theories about this highly unknown phenomenon proved to be both incredibly fun and deeply frustrating as he hypothesized the existence of another invisible force in the world. Glancing down with an exhausted sigh, Rust stared directly at the adorable little white dragon who was the primary source of all his current academic frustration. Calling out the magnificent creature's newly gifted name, Rust gently commanded Seeluk to bring out the mysterious magical plate one more time for further intense study. Happily complying with its master's request, the dragon let out an energetic chirp as its magical energies began to swirl around the camp once again. Suddenly interrupting his deep magical concentration, a voice called out to Master Rust and questioned if those glowing symbols were strictly meant for the contract ritual alone. Realizing it was finally time to depart for their grand mission, Rust acknowledged Ari and prepared to help the team with the massive road construction project today. Mounting the now massive beast alongside his trusted companions, Rust called out to Seeluk as the powerful creature prepared to take them into the sky. Looking back with a confident smile, Rust firmly commanded the others to stay safely behind with Rose since his team would be going out for quite a while. Spreading its delicate wings with a soft flutter, the majestic white dragon prepares to take flight alongside its new companions. Observing the graceful creature soaring effortlessly through the clouds alongside their mount, Rust theorized that dragons must possess incredibly light bodies specifically designed for flight. Letting out a cheerful chirp as it nudges affectionately against him, the tiny dragon eagerly accepts Rust's warm invitation to join them on their journey. Agreeing to the arrangement with a determined nod, the group officially sets off on their grand expedition across the rugged landscape. Sunlight beams down radiantly upon the travelers as they ride steadily across the vast and sparkling plains with the dragon gliding joyfully alongside them. Peering through her glasses at the majestic creature dancing in the air, a mesmerizing sight prompts her to softly marvel at its absolute beauty. Rust quickly agrees with her as she openly admits she never expected legendary dragons to be quite so elegant and graceful in motion. Smiling fondly at his incredible achievement, she proudly remarks that it perfectly makes sense for Master Rust to become the very first person in hundreds of years to successfully form a dragon contract. She completely praises his vast intellect by stating his knowledge stretches far beyond standard alchemy since they were entirely clueless while watching the complex ritual unfold. Awkwardly brushing off their high praise while sweating nervously, Rust humbly confesses that he did not fully understand the mysterious ritual either and that everything just sort of miraculously happened. He seriously explains that he had never encountered anything like the bizarrely half-transparent plate before and frustratingly notes that he was the only person capable of actually seeing it. Realizing the massive limitations of his current data, the young alchemist declares they will never uncover the truth behind the magic unless they can successfully manifest the strange interface once again. Emphasizing the strict rules of academic research, he passionately argues that being able to replicate the exact phenomenon is absolutely crucial, otherwise people might just dismiss his incredible discovery as a wild hallucination. Shifting his intense focus back to the present moment, Rust offers a warm smile and decides to simply enjoy watching little Sealuk happily flying around for now. Suddenly shattering the peaceful atmosphere, a frantic warning rings out as monsters launch an unexpected ambush on the traveling group. Instantly snapping into intense combat readiness, the young warrior firmly grips her staff and glares dangerously toward the hidden enemy threat. Leaping fiercely from her mount with blinding speed, she wildly swings her weapon downward while loudly screaming that the lethal threat is coming from right beneath them. Watching her flawlessly execute the preemptive strike before the beasts can even breach the surface, Rust thoroughly admires her incredible reliability in combat. Despite her flawless takedown, she lands gracefully but breathlessly admits that the surprisingly tough creature was extremely hard to kill. Closely inspecting the freshly slain beast, they quickly identify the dangerous ambush predator as a highly aggressive mole-type monster. Rust urgently calls out to his dragon while mentally calculating the severe danger since this new mole enemy proved significantly tougher than the heavily armored salmon they previously fought. Barking out rapid tactical commands as two more subterranean threats approach, the young warrior desperately orders Rust to handle the right flank while simultaneously urging the dragon to fly higher for safety. A horrifying screech erupts from the fractured earth as a vicious subterranean creature bursts through the rocky terrain right toward their vulnerable mount. With a startled cry from his loyal beast of burden, Rust frantically commands Hippopo to evade the lethal underground strike at the very last second. Executing a surprisingly agile maneuver, the massive beast swiftly leaps out of harm's way just as the razor-sharp claws violently shred the empty space beneath it. Catching a terrifying glimpse of the monster's grotesque anatomy, Rust shockingly notes its multiple unnatural abdominal legs which grant it terrifying and unexpected speed. Drawing his specialized alchemical gear with lethal intent, Rust boldly leaps into the fray and declares they absolutely cannot allow the rapid beast to escape back underground. Diving from the sky like a brilliant white meteor, Sealuk viciously crashes into the monstrous creature and instantly annihilates it with overwhelming draconic force. Watching in absolute shock through her wide-eyed glasses, the young warrior stares speechlessly as the creature is violently smashed instantly into the rocky ground. Gliding majestically back into the sunny sky after delivering the fatal blow, the dragon leaves the entire team utterly speechless at its devastating primordial power. Carefully approaching the aftermath of the intense battle, Hippopo sniffs curiously at the remarkably intact corpse of the first monster that was swiftly taken down during the initial ambush. Noticing Rust tossing a magical measuring instrument toward the strange carcass, his companion carefully asks if he has discovered something highly unusual about the dead beast. Kneeling intently beside the gruesome remains, the brilliant alchemist firmly concludes that the bizarre creature is actually a highly unnatural chimera. Peeling back the coarse fur to properly examine its disturbing anatomy, he meticulously identifies the terrifying fused traits of a mole, a mouse, and a horrific centipede. Pointing directly at the creature's exposed underbelly, he shockingly reveals a cluster of parasitic mushrooms growing right out of its unnatural abdomen. Discussing the disturbing biological implications, they collectively agree that a grotesque mixture of four entirely different species is completely unprecedented in this region. Staring grimly at the mutated corpse, they logically deduce that this horrifying biological anomaly must be an entirely new and highly dangerous species. Realizing their loyal animal companions detected the threat long before they did, Rust deeply wonders exactly what specific detail triggered their sharp primal instincts. Visibly distressed by the lingering foulness in the air, the massive beast shakes its heavy head and lets out a low grumble of deep discomfort. Observing their mount's highly agitated behavior, the team concludes that the sensitive beast is definitely picking up on an incredibly unpleasant and invisible aura. Checking his magical transcribed scroll for any hidden dangers, Rust frustratingly confirms that the specialized instrument cannot detect even a single trace of toxic poison. Sensing the mounting unease from the nervous animals, Rust carefully hesitates and asks if he should completely abandon harvesting the valuable monster materials. Deciding to prioritize absolute safety over greed, they agree to completely incinerate the highly suspicious corpses just in case they carry an unknown contagion. Stepping up to assist with the necessary disposal, she politely asks if taking the extra time to properly burn the bodies will ruin their current travel schedule. Taking strict biohazard precautions, Rust firmly orders her not to touch anything without protective gear while he prepares to aggressively sanitize their mount's limbs with a special cleansing potion. The potent alchemical mixture violently reacts the moment it splashes onto their contaminated remains and immediately triggers a highly destructive chemical breakdown. Startled by the sudden intensity of the roaring magical flames, Rust violently recoils as the grotesque mutant corpses are entirely consumed by the blinding inferno. With the hazardous disposal finally complete and the team ready to depart, Rust stares suspiciously into the lingering smoke and quietly wonders if he actually saw something sinister moving within the dying flames. A massive beast stomps its heavy foot onto the rocky ground with a deafening thud as dust and debris scatter everywhere. Arriving at the bustling construction site where the roadwork is actively being done, the group marvels at the impressive machinery while one of them eagerly notes how the process actually works. Looking out over the vast landscape, they observe that this crucial road stretches all the way from the neighboring dominion directly to their camp right at the entrance of the borderland. Taking a deep breath of the air with a satisfied smile, Rust notes that work sites have an indescribable charm and excitedly points out that he can smell something delicious cooking just as someone calls his name. Turning toward the approaching figure, they pleasantly greet Mr. Memels and warmly acknowledge that it has been quite a while since their last meeting. Curiously asking if he is also present because of the ongoing roadwork, the group listens as Memels confirms his involvement ever since the previous business regarding the magic crystals. Holding his official documents with a polite smile, Memels explains that this is an incredibly large undertaking and proudly reveals he is officially stationed there as an inspector. Bowing deeply to show his immense gratitude, Memels thanks them profoundly for their vital help because it is incredibly important to stabilize the circulation of goods as quickly as possible. Glancing over at the rapid construction progress, Memels marvels at how incredibly fast the work is proceeding and openly praises the wonderfully efficient transmuted beasts. Nodding in understanding, the young alchemist listens humbly as Memels reveals that even the official military alchemists in their dominion's army are completely in awe of his remarkable skills. Admitting that he is merely an outsider, Rust apologizes for the trouble but politely asks Memels to act as an intermediary and properly introduce him to the local alchemists. Placing a hand respectfully over his chest, the gracious inspector closes his eyes and smoothly accepts the introduction request with absolute pleasure. Feeling visibly relieved by the inspector's warm cooperation, Rust internally notes that it is incredibly nice to have a familiar acquaintance present to help smooth things over. The Dominion alchemists immediately snap to a rigid attention and loudly declare what an absolute honor it is to finally meet the famous Master Rust. Sweating slightly while wondering exactly what crazy rumors they have heard about him, Rust nervously notes the lack of master ranks and desperately wishes they would not stand at strict attention every single time. Trying to ease the intense atmosphere, Rust humbly introduces himself as the newcomer while explaining that public works are outside his expertise and kindly asks everyone to drop the stiff formalities. Smiling warmly as he asks them to teach him so they can successfully accomplish their shared goals, Rust happily notes the tension leaving their faces and feels relieved that he finally managed to break the ice. Suddenly, the alchemists gasp in sheer wonder as the magnificent white dragon gracefully flutters into view and perfectly perches right upon Rust's shoulder. The entire group of Dominion alchemists freezes in absolute shock as their eyes widen while staring completely mesmerized at the tiny mythical creature. Crowding around in sheer amazement, the alchemists wildly praise his incredible inventions while marveling at the beautiful pure white dragon and excitedly confirming that the legendary rumors were actually true. As the little dragon softly chirps in response to the overwhelming attention, the frantic alchemists eagerly swarm a highly overwhelmed Rust who nervously realizes his peaceful icebreaker mood clearly did not last very long. Shattering the chaotic ore with an urgent scream, a panicked warning announces that the highly dangerous pseudo-moles have suddenly returned in significantly larger numbers. Swiftly shifting into battle readiness, Rust orders Ari to warn the entire camp about the monster's bizarre peculiarities while noting that the heavily armed combat engineers were specifically stationed here for this exact scenario. Barking out rapid tactical commands as the subterranean threat violently approaches, the squad leader fiercely orders everyone to hold their defensive positions with the combat engineers anchored directly in the center. Preparing a massive coordinated counterattack against the incoming horde, the commanding officer loudly orders the elite magic gun unit to immediately form a rigid firing line. Raising her glowing magical tools with intense determination, one of the skilled Dominion alchemists aggressively channels her energy while shouting that she is sending out the transmuted beasts. Glowing hexagonal alchemical barriers suddenly materialize in the air as the specialized combat squad channels their powerful magic to rapidly deploy the heavily armored beast constructs. Massive razor-sharp claws violently tear right through the glowing alchemical portals as terrifyingly gigantic magical beasts begin to physically manifest onto the bloody battlefield. 3 enormously powerful bear-type transmuted beasts simultaneously erupt from the summoning circles while letting out ferocious roaring battle cries to intimidate the approaching enemy horde. Closely analyzing the impressive battlefield tactics, Rust deduces that each alchemist can only manifest one creature while noting that these highly powerful and dexterous bear constructs are extremely popular within the army. Sharply pointing her long staff toward the distant and ominous mountain ridge, the young warrior loudly warns the entire defensive line exactly where the monstrous enemies will strike from. Glaring intensely through her cracked monocle as the unseen threat rapidly closes the distance, she initiates a tense tactical countdown to perfectly time their devastating magical barrage. The earth suddenly violently ruptures directly in front of the defensive line just as her tactical countdown finally hits absolute zero. Without a single second of hesitation, the commanding officer fiercely screams for the magic guns to unleash their overwhelming firepower upon the emerging subterranean targets. Massive explosions brutally rock the battlefield as the soldiers eagerly watch the thick smoke and proudly shout that they have successfully confirmed direct magical impacts. Staring through the dissipating smoke in absolute horror, Rust desperately warns the squad that the devastating magical volley had a completely negligible effect on the monstrous horde. Closely observing the terrifyingly durable monster looming above them, he frustratingly notes that unlike their previously defeated chimeras, this specific beast does not seem to be mixed with any other animal species. Desperately trying to crack the creature's thick armor, the military commander frantically orders his trembling troops to ready their weapons and unleash a massive second volley of intense magical fire. Despite confirming multiple direct and explosive impacts against the beast's massive body, the panicked soldiers horrifyingly realize that their strongest weapons are having extremely little effect once again. His eyes widening as he finally grasps the absolutely terrifying biological truth behind the monster's incredible durability, Rust urgently screams that the invincible enemy is actually a massive fungal colony type. As the ominous silhouette rises from the earth with a heavy rumble, Rust calmly observes the new threat and identifies it as a highly problematic colony type. Analyzing the massive creature, he deduces that it is not a chimera of mixed species but actually a giant form created by a massive swarm of regular-sized moles huddled tightly together. Seizing the initiative, the Dominion alchemists fiercely command their massive transmuted bear beasts to charge forward against the towering fungal amalgamation. The magical beasts violently clash with the colossal creature as they unleash a flurry of devastating slashes against its incredibly durable exterior. Staring in absolute shock at the massive scale of the enemy, the soldiers desperately realize their ferocious attacks can only scrape the outer layer of moles right off the surface. Suddenly, the colossal amalgamation easily retaliates with a devastating swipe that violently knocks one of the heavy transmuted beasts completely out of the air. With their magic guns and powerful beasts proving completely ineffective against the colossal threat, Rust boldly steps forward and confidently declares that he can take it down. Firmly asking the commanding officer to leave the entire situation in his capable hands, Rust watches as the commander frantically orders everyone to step back and stay on high alert. Stepping confidently onto the shattered battlefield with unyielding focus, the brilliant young alchemist immediately initiates a powerful composite activation sequence. With a swift and elegant motion, he dramatically flings multiple magical scrolls high into the shimmering air around him. A breathtaking array of glowing hexagonal magic circles suddenly materializes in the sky above the utterly bewildered army. Glaring intensely at his intricate magical setup, Rust aggressively shouts the command to combine the floating arrays into a single devastating formation. The individual magical nodes rapidly link together into a massive and incredibly complex alchemical barrier that violently crackles with overwhelming energy. As the colossal mole monster ruthlessly brings its massive fist crashing down toward him, Rust firmly orders everyone to watch the impending spectacle. Triggering a massive serial manifestation spell, Rust summons his spectacular Hippopo brothers just in time to effortlessly block the monstrous impact. The sheer physical force of the sudden magical block violently shatters the massive creature's arm into countless flying pieces. Fueled by the immense rush of combat magic, a fiercely grinning Rust shouts that he is not even close to being completely done yet. A massive stampede of adorable mini-hippopos suddenly erupts from the magical arrays as Rust excitedly commands everyone to charge relentlessly after the enemy. The terrifying fungal giant lets out a deafening roar of absolute agony as the overwhelming tide of magical beasts brutally swarms its colossal body. Thousands of heavy hooves mercilessly trample the monstrous entity and rapidly crush the squirming colony back into the fractured dirt. Leading the chaotic charge with a thunderous bellow, the giant manifestation utterly destroys the remaining structural integrity of the monstrous horde. As the chaotic dust finally settles to reveal a strange surviving mushroom core, a highly confused Rust watches little Seeluk immediately dive toward the bizarre anomaly. Desperately screaming for everyone to get down, the panicked alchemist wildly reaches out to stop his reckless draconic companion. Without a single moment of hesitation, the tiny white dragon unleashes an absolutely devastating beam of primordial energy that completely obliterates the sky. As the terrifying blast entirely eradicates the remaining monstrous threat, a stunned silence falls over the battlefield while the soldiers nervously wonder if the nightmare is finally over. The entire camp erupts into absolute chaos as the awestruck soldiers wildly praise Rust as a true master alchemist while enthusiastically losing their minds over the legendary dragon breath and the adorable transmuted beasts. Quietly whispering the return command to dismiss his magical constructs, an incredibly overwhelmed Rust sighs heavily while nervously watching the cheering army swarm toward him. Awkwardly trying to deflect their massive wave of endless gratitude, he sheepishly smiles while realizing that avoiding the overwhelming spotlight is completely impossible now. Distracting himself from the chaotic praise, Rust meticulously examines his glowing array and deeply notes that a dangerous level of magical static is currently running right through the intricate transmutation circle. He happily explains to his companions that these experimental composite scrolls were born from his recent intense research and that he is incredibly relieved the sudden battlefield debut went perfectly well. Acknowledging the strict operational limits of the unstable magic circles, Rust humbly redirects all the glory by firmly crediting Kalen's generous budget and the incredibly abundant Borderland monster materials for his massive success. Suddenly snapping him out of his deep academic reflection, a soft chirp and a low grumble from his loyal animal companions warn him of an incoming presence. Rust violently flinches in absolute terror as a massive wave of fanatical alchemists sprint directly toward him while wildly screaming his name at the top of their lungs. Completely engulfed by the deafening roar of applause and cheers, the young alchemist stands utterly paralyzed as the Dominion forces joyfully celebrate their incredible new hero.